Hey guys, tonight we're stepping straight into the powdered, perfumed, and positively perilous world of Regency England courtship. You think dating apps are brutal? Please, at least they don't involve your parents, your priest, and your dressmaker. Tonight you're not just flirting, you're navigating a rigid social minefield, where one wrong word could cost you a marriage, a fortune, or your reputation forever. And spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this. Statistically speaking, you're more likely to end up alone, bankrupt, or writing melancholy poetry in a drafty library while your younger cousin marries the girl of your dreams. Just saying. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm not going to guilt trip you with a puppy or fake tears. We're here for awkward dances and tragic waistcoats. Also drop your city and what time it is where you're watching. I'm always curious who's listening while pretending to fall asleep. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It begins in the assembly rooms. Always the assembly rooms. Polished wooden floors, candlelight bouncing off crystal chandeliers, and the scent of too many bodies in too little space, all disguised under layers of rosewater and shaving cream. You arrive slightly early, rookie mistake. And now you're stuck lingering near the refreshment table with a sweating glass of punch and your best cravat already starting to wilt. You glance around. Your competition is here, preening and positioning themselves like chess pieces, young bucks in tight breeches, matrons with eyes sharper than daggers, and debutantes fluttering their fans like hummingbirds on espresso. It's the season. And if you're unmarried, eligible, and breathing, you're expected to participate. Whether you want to or not, the music begins, string quartet predictably, and couples start to take the floor. You're not dancing yet. No, you're watching, always watching. Because this is the opening standoff of the night. Every gaze counts, every ignored bow or accepted curtsy is a loaded message. The wrong partner could tank your chances before you've even asked for a second dance. And heaven help you if your dance card fills too fast. Or worse, not at all. Now, she enters. Her, the one you've heard about for weeks, Lady Eleanor with the eyes, who supposedly turned down a baron because he stuttered. You spot her across the room, draped in pale blue muslin, arm linked with her aunt's. She doesn't look like she turns people down for sport, but who really knows? This is the first test. You're supposed to approach, be introduced by someone reputable, and secure a dance slot, ideally two. But not back to back, because that would look too eager. You shift your weight, adjust your gloves, and try to remember if your boots are clean. First impressions, after all, are not casual things here. They're practically contracts. Of course, it's not just about her, it's about who she's standing near. Proximity matters. Who introduced her? Who's already danced with her? You glance at the mother. Impressive bonnet. And then there's the aunt. The one with the monocle and the face like a disappointed falcon. You're not getting past that without a wingman. Enter your cousin Geoffrey, who is, unfortunately, extremely charming and infinitely more relaxed than you. He slaps you on the back, makes a joke about how this room smells like boiled cabbage and anxiety, and then promptly sails across the floor to kiss someone's gloved hand. He's not even trying, he's just like that. The problem is, you're not. You overthink everything. You rehearse lines in your head. You plan your bow so you don't stumble. You check the sheen of your boots in the reflection of the punch bowl. Meanwhile, Geoffrey has already secured 2 dances and is now being fawned over by Lady Eleanor's less pretty cousin, who is still objectively out of your league. You finally spot an opening when Lady Eleanor breaks away for a moment to fetch a drink. She's standing alone, sort of. The aunt is nearby, squinting into her teacup like it might contain poison, but not close enough to interfere. You begin to make your move. A well-dressed man intercepts her just as you get halfway there. You recognise him, Lord Finchley. Tall, slightly balding, has a monocle he doesn't need but wears anyway for effect. You immediately hate him. He's the kind who'll talk about his new horses until your ears bleed and still get the dance. Eleanor laughs at something he says. It could be genuine or polite. It's impossible to tell. You retreat, not in disgrace but in strategic withdrawal. This isn't failure, it's timing. You lean casually against the nearest column and attempt to look both disinterested and fascinating. Here's the thing. Nobody is here just for fun. Assembly rooms are essentially Regency speed dating arenas, with better lighting and worse shoes. The goal is courtship and eventually marriage. And marriage isn't about love. Not really. It's about property, bloodlines, and whether your great-uncle once met the Duke of Devonshire at a hunting party. Fact of the night. During the Regency period, eligible young women were often presented during the London season, sometimes as young as 17. Their entire year revolved around balls, promenades and tea visits, all in pursuit of a husband. Romantic, right? Quirk of the night. There were entire books written for women on how to signal interest with a fan. Yes, a literal fan. Drop it once, flirting. Twice. Disaster. And if you touch it to your left cheek, apparently that meant I'm engaged. You start to realise this isn't courtship, it's espionage with corsets. Debate of the night. Some historians argue that not everyone was playing this high-stakes game for money or name. There's evidence, sparse but compelling, that a few couples did marry for affection, or at least grew into it. But the system? It didn't exactly encourage emotional intimacy before commitment. It was like agreeing to adopt a puppy with someone after one walk through the park. You don't get that dance with Eleanor tonight. She leaves early with her aunt and you pretend you weren't watching the entire time. But she looked back once, just once. You think, or maybe it was indigestion. Hard to say. Still, you leave the assembly room strangely hopeful and soaked in cologne. Someone spilled a whole bottle of bergamot on the coat rack. And now you smell like an overly romantic lemon tart. You don't sleep that night. Not really. You lie in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every second of the assembly room like it's a stage production, and you're the understudy who tripped on his entrance. Did she see you? Did she notice you nearly spill your punch trying to look aloof? Was that smirk meant for Lord Finchley, or maybe for you? The next morning your mother brings in tea and immediate judgment. She's been watching you hover around the drawing room window for 20 minutes. Go for a walk, she says, or pretend to read something, you're being obvious. You grab a newspaper, hold it upside down, and try not to blush. Eventually, you do go out. The town's card room is open early because, well, of course, people need a place to gather and pretend to do anything other than gossip. You push open the door and step into the warm, smoky hush of a Regency-era den of barely concealed motives. Tables are arranged for whist and loo. Chairs are filled with older gentlemen who look like their only hobbies are playing badly and judging silently. In the corner, a group of ladies sits by the windows with embroidery hoops they're not using. They're scanning the room for updates. You're now the news. You spot Lady Eleanor sitting at one of the corner tables beside her chaperone. Not the terrifying monocle aunt this time. This one's a more relaxed cousin. Her smile doesn't look like a warning. That's your opening. You take a step forward, heart punching at your ribs, then, oh no, Geoffrey. He slides into the seat beside Eleanor like he was born there. Offers her a witty observation about the weather. You can't hear it, but she laughs, and orders a lemonade with confidence you cannot relate to. It's like watching a magician rearrange your plans with a single sleight of hand, but you don't retreat this time. No, you sit at the nearest table, join a game you have no interest in, and proceed to lose 2 shillings and a small piece of your dignity while keeping one eye on her. You're not proud of it, but courtship is surveillance. You're learning how she reacts to different jokes, what makes her smile, whether she plays with the chain on her reticule when she's nervous. Little things, spy things. Because here's the secret no one tells you. Most of Regency flirting doesn't involve talking. It's fans, glances, seating arrangements, and stolen seconds between monitored moments. Eleanor knows you're there. She looks your way twice, and once when Geoffrey says something obnoxious, which is often, her eyes dart in your direction like she's checking to see if you noticed. Fact of the day. In Regency society, public displays of affection were essentially forbidden before engagement. Touching hands during a dance was already a big deal. Actual conversation? That had to be deliberate and almost always chaperoned. So the entire courtship process became a theatrical performance where eyes, posture, and even appearance carried weight. Quirk of the day. Gentlemen carried snuff boxes and ladies carried fans, not just for style but as coded tools of communication. Some men even developed personalised ways to offer snuff to someone they liked. Yes, nothing says romance like shared powdered tobacco. Imagine giving your crush a vape pen to signal affection. Same vibe. Debate of the day. There's been much scholarly argument about whether Regency women were actually passive players in this drama. Some argue they were trapped in a system of arranged futures. Others claim these women wielded significant quiet power, turning down suitors, manipulating family opinions, and managing reputations like social chess masters. Eleanor, you suspect, falls into the latter category. Geoffrey eventually excuses himself, probably to chase another flirtation, and for the first time all day, Eleanor's table is vacant. You finish your losing streak of cards, wipe your palms on your breeches, and make your approach. She sees you, smiles, a real one this time. It doesn't reach full brightness, but it's warm and quick, like she's rewarding your patience. Her cousin looks up and offers the smallest, faintest nod of acknowledgement. You're cleared to sit. "Good morning," you say, your voice far too high. "Is it?" Eleanor replies with a small tilt of her head. "The fog hasn't lifted since breakfast." You nod, say something about how fog gives the town a certain poetic sadness, regret that sentence instantly. But she doesn't laugh. She doesn't mock you. In fact, she leans forward just slightly and says, "I find fog rather comforting. It hides the less pleasant things." You're not entirely sure what that means, but it feels like a test. You respond carefully. "Anne reveals the ones worth noticing?" She raises an eyebrow. "You may have just passed a level. You talk like this for maybe 5 minutes." Her cousin sips tea and pretends to read. Eleanor asks about your family, your horses, your opinions on the theatre. You do your best to sound intelligent but not arrogant, curious but not desperate. You realise you're leaning in too far and correct your posture mid-sentence, nearly knocking over the teacups. She laughs again. It's not mocking this time. It's charmed. A little. When you part ways, it's with a nod and a shared glance that lingers exactly long enough to be noticed, but not scandalous. And that's what passes for a good day in Regency courtship. You didn't trip, you didn't get snubbed. You didn't ruin her name by standing too close for too long. Later that afternoon, your mother asks where you've been. You say, "Just out," she doesn't press. But her eyes narrow slightly, and she begins to casually ask around town the next morning. You'll hear about it later, over breakfast, when she suddenly mentions that Eleanor's father once lost a lot of money in Spain. The comment will be casual, but the meaning will be clear. Tread lightly. Love may be blooming, but estates and debts still decide who ends up at the altar. Still, you can't help but replay that smile again. It was subtle. It was cautious. But it was real. And for now, that's enough. Your first real move begins with stationery. Not flowers, not poems, not an impulsive ride on horseback through the rain to confess your feelings. No, this is Regency England, and the game begins with the humble calling card, a small cream-coloured rectangle embossed with your name and nothing else, not even your address. People are supposed to know who you are, or else you shouldn't be calling on them in the first place. You sit at your writing desk, the one near the window with the view of the neighbour's garden, and the annoyingly smug squirrel that keeps stealing pears. Your pen hovers above the stack of cards. You're not writing a message. That would be improper and presumptuous. You're merely selecting which card to send. It has to be the right weight, the right font, even the right corner curl. If the edge is too sharp, it looks aggressive. Too soft, and it looks cheap. You finally pick one that feels appropriately indifferent. The next step is even more absurd. You hand the card to your manservant, who mounts a horse and trots it over to Lady Eleanor's family home. Not to hand it to her, mind you, that would be scandalous. He delivers it to the servant, who then places it on a silver tray which is eventually brought to her mother. Then, and only then, does the social dance begin. If your card is accepted, you may be granted the honour of calling on the family, which means showing up at an extremely specific hour, never before noon, never after 4, and sitting in a stiff chair in their drawing room, pretending to be at ease while Eleanor's mother offers you weak tea and sharper question. Luckily, your card is not returned. That's the worst case scenario, when your card is sent back in an envelope, the social equivalent of a slap in the face with a white glove. Instead, your servant is told that you may call on Thursday afternoon. You spend the next day in a haze of nerves and overthinking. You shave twice. You ask Geoffrey if your waistcoat makes you look like a buttered ham. He says yes and then steals it for his own use. You pick another one, powder blue. You regret it immediately, but you're out of time. When you arrive at the Marchmont residence, you are greeted by a footman whose entire personality seems to be mildly disapproving. He leads you through a hallway decorated with ancestral portraits and dried flowers. There's even a painting of a horse that looks more important than you, and finally you're shown into the drawing room. It smells like lemon polish and recently blown out candles. Lady Eleanor is seated at the far end of the room, needlework in hand, posture absolutely perfect. Her mother sits beside her, eyes half-lidded but alert, like a lioness pretending to nap. You bow. They rise just enough to acknowledge your presence. You're offered tea, which you accept, and then spend the next 10 minutes trying not to spill it on the rug. Your family is from Gloucestershire, is it not? Her mother asks, tone cool and precise. Yes, madam. Cattle or sheep? Cattle, mostly. This is not a casual inquiry, this is code for how many acres do you own and are you burdened with debt? Lady Eleanor remains silent at first, eyes on her embroidery, but then she glances up just once and says, Do you enjoy literature, Mr. Barrington? You do, sort of. Well, you've read some books. You mentioned Byron. Her mother winces. You quickly pivot to Cowper. Safe, sentimental, Anglican enough to pass scrutiny. The conversation drifts to weather, local news, and a recent scandal involving someone's daughter eloping with a music tutor. You're careful not to look too interested. Though your mind is already halfway through a fantasy where you and Eleanor flee to Scotland, consequences be damned. Fact of the day, in Regency England, the exchange of calling cards wasn't just formality, it was a coded ritual of social approval. One wrong move and you were labelled not received, effectively banished from someone's guest list and, by extension, their world. Quirk of the day, some families use special card trays with edges that folded up to protect the cards from being disturbed, almost like tiny shrines to social ambition. Some people even left the best cards on display to show off which esteemed visitors had come calling. Debate of the day. Historians argue about how much say young women really had in accepting or rejecting suitors during these visits. Officially it was all up to the parents, but letters and diaries suggest women often found subtle ways to discourage unwanted attention, through tone, posture, or suddenly becoming unavailable whenever a certain gentleman called. You stay exactly 32 minutes, which is optimal. Too short would seem rude, too long would border on desperation. As you rise to leave, Eleanor walks you to the door, alone, though still within view of the hallway mirror, where her mother can watch everything reflected. I'm glad you called, she says softly. You look nervous. You smile, surprised by her bluntness. I was nervous. Good. That makes two of us. Then she disappears behind the door, and you step out into the fresh air, lungs filling like you've escaped something dangerous. You walk home, not even noticing how your boots are starting to pinch. Later that evening, your mother finds a way to casually mention that she heard from Mrs. Marchmont's cousin's neighbour's hairdresser that Eleanor found your waistcoat refreshingly brave. You suppress a grin. You've made it past the first gate. You've been received, officially. It doesn't mean you're halfway to marriage, but it means you've been allowed into the arena. Now the real game begins. And tomorrow, you'll have to figure out how to survive a walk in the park with a chaperone who never blinks. The next test arrives on a bright and bitter morning, the kind where the sun tries its best to look cheerful but the wind has other opinions. You receive the note during breakfast. Well, your mother receives it, but she reads it aloud while you're halfway through a roll. Lady Marchmont requests the pleasure of your company for a promenade in the Royal Crescent Park tomorrow at 10. She says this without inflection, as if discussing laundry. You nod as casually as you can, but your stomach somersaults and the roll suddenly tastes like sawdust. The promenade is a critical step in the courtship waltz. It sounds innocent, just a walk, but in reality, it's a supervised test of composure, conversation, and compatibility. A moment outside the drawing room, yes, but still very much under observation. And no, you won't be alone. Chaperones are like ghosts in this world, ever-present, quietly judgmental, and nearly impossible to shake. You spend half the night deciding what to wear. It's a walk, not a ball, but everything matters. You eventually choose a dark green frock coat with brass buttons, breeches that are just tight enough to suggest you haven't skipped leg day, as much as one can in an era without dumbbells, and a cravat that takes 3 attempts and 1 curse to tie properly. At precisely 9:58, you arrive at the park entrance. You're early, of course. Being late would suggest a lack of interest, or worse, poor breeding. You wait under a line of skeletal elm trees, watching the mist rise from the grass and trying not to look like someone abandoned by his valet. Then you see her. Eleanor, flanked by her cousin and a maid who looks like she was hired purely for her ability to detect flirtation within a 10-foot radius. She's dressed for the weather, but not overly so. A pale lavender pelisse lined with fur, gloves the exact shade of ash, and a bonnet so perfectly angled you wonder how it stays on without divine intervention. She greets you with a smile that suggests the day might actually go in your favour. You begin the walk. It's not romantic. Not yet. The paths are muddy in places, and Eleanor's cousin seems to take perverse joy in steering you toward every puddle. Birds squawk overhead, children run past trailing sticky ribbons and crumbs. Still you talk. First about nothing, the weather, the state of the roads, the rumour that Mrs. Fillmore's pug bit a bishop last week, then slowly, carefully about yourselves. She asks about your schooling, your favourite poets, whether you prefer riding or shooting. You admit you're terrible at hunting, which earns you a grin. So you're more of a scholar than a sportsman, she teases. You shrug. I like books. They don't bleed when you miss. The conversation deepens just a little more. She tells you she enjoys sketching landscapes but refuses to show them to anyone. You ask what she draws. Mostly trees, sometimes ruins, occasionally the backs of people's heads. You laugh and vow to sit very still the next time you're around her. As you talk, you're hyper-aware of the chaperone presence. The cousin trails a few feet behind, close enough to hear, but far enough to feign disinterest. Occasionally she coughs, loudly. Once she asks Eleanor if she'd like her shawl adjusted, even though Eleanor isn't wearing one. The maid follows like a shadow, eyes sharp. You suspect she's memorising your tone, word choice, and maybe even your breath count. Fact of the day, unchaperoned time between unmarried men and women was almost non-existent among the upper classes during the Regency period. A young woman's virtue, meaning her reputation, was guarded like royal treasure. Even being seen alone with a man could spark rumours that would sink a marriage prospect. Quirk of the day, some chaperones were hired not just for supervision, but for subtle manipulation. A skilled aunt or their cousin could help guide a conversation, redirect flirtation, or conveniently mishear something scandalous to repeat later, weaponizing even the mildest tea into social artillery. Debate of the day. Some historians argue that the strict chaperoning system actually created more tension and temptation. Forbidden glances, breathless pauses, and the constant awareness of being watched may have added a sort of thrill, one that the modern dating lacks. Others say it was simply a miserable cage with good manners. By the halfway point in the walk, you're both a little more relaxed. You've avoided any major verbal disasters. Eleanor seems genuinely amused by you, which is either a good sign or a terrible one, depending on whether she treats all her suitors like charming buffoons. You reach the top of a small hill where the wind picks up. She tucks a loose strand of hair back under her bonnet and gazes out at the valley below. It's strange, she says, how beautiful everything looks from a distance, even the parts that are falling apart. You glance over and realise she's not just talking about the landscape. You want to say something profound in return. Instead, you offer her your handkerchief because her nose has turned pink and you're fairly certain she's freezing. She accepts it. That matters. She could have declined with a polite smile. She could have let the wind turn her to ice rather than accept something that might later be interpreted as intimate. But she takes it, dabs her nose delicately, and hands it back. You tuck it into your coat pocket like it's been kissed by royalty. As you head back down the path, you sense a shift. Slight, but real. The walk is still watched, still whispered, still a performance, but now there's a softness in the silence between questions, a comfort in the shared awareness of what this all means. This isn't just a social obligation anymore. It's an opening. When you part ways at the park gates, she thanks you. Not out of obligation, but something warmer. Her cousin gives you a bland nod, and the maid squints at you like she's putting your soul under a microscope. You bow to all three and walk away, pulse steady, mouth dry. You don't look back. You want to desperately, but you're learning. Courtship in this era is like fencing, all about control, restraint, and knowing when to make your move. And you just survived a walk with 3 women watching your every step. Not bad for a man who once tripped on his own spurs at a harvest fair. A few days pass. You play it cool, or at least try to. You don't go charging back to the Marchmont house, despite the part of your brain that keeps screaming what if she forgets you exist. Instead, you wait. You take long, mostly pointless walks through town. You polish your boots twice in one day. You reread Byron's sonnets even though you still don't really understand half of them. And then, right when you're beginning to worry that your moment has passed, the invitation arrives. Not from Eleanor, from her mother. You've been invited to join them for an afternoon stroll through the gardens of Lady Pembroke's estate, along with several other young persons of good character. In other words, it's not about you, it's a group outing. But don't be fooled, this isn't a picnic. It's a staged arena, a social proving ground, a public audition for marriage eligibility, with well-tended hedges and peacocks watching from a distance. You arrive in full daylight, slightly overdressed, slightly nervous, and entirely prepared to pretend this is casual. Eleanor is already there, of course, surrounded by a loose ring of admirers and watchful mothers. The group totals about 12, 6 eligible young ladies, 5 increasingly uncomfortable young men, and 1 older gentleman who clearly thought this was a card party and is now trapped in floral hell. Everyone starts the promenade in 2s and 3s, slowly branching off into little pairs. The paths are wide but not too wide, perfectly engineered for polite conversation and low-stakes intimacy. You find yourself beside Eleanor within the first 10 minutes, and it doesn't feel like an accident. Her cousin, today's chaperone, is trailing behind again, taking careful note of everything without saying a word. Eleanor smiles at you, not the practiced smile she gives to Lord Finchley, or the pitying one she offers the vicar's son. This one is subtle, knowing, and just a bit weary. If one more person asks me whether I prefer poetry or music, she murmurs, I may throw myself into the rose bushes. You chuckle. I suppose I shouldn't ask then. She considers. Ask if you must. But I warn you, I have very controversial opinions about harpsichords. You continue the walk, keeping just the right distance between your sleeves so no one can say you brushed arms, and talk about everything that isn't marriage. Books, mostly. She likes novels, secretly. The scandal of fiction hasn't entirely passed in her mother's circles. She hides them under more acceptable volumes, like Gibbon's Decline and Fall, which she claims is mostly for the look of the spine. I'm halfway through Camilla, she says, then pauses. You probably haven't read it. You haven't. You admit it. She seems amused, not disappointed. It's terribly long, she says. I wouldn't recommend it, but the heroine gets to travel, to decide things. That's rare. You're about to ask more, but then it happens. The interruption. Lord Finchley steps in, all waistcoat and entitlement. He inserts himself between you and Eleanor, with the casual elegance of someone who has never been told no in his life. He launches into a monologue about a recent fox hunt where he broke his second-best boot and still managed to wound the creature. You wonder, briefly, if the fox was the lucky one. Eleanor's expression doesn't change, but her eyes flick toward you for a half-second, almost an apology. The cousin chaperone doesn't intervene. This too is part of the test, how you handle competition. You don't storm off, you don't challenge him to a duel on the spot. Tempting, but no. You linger politely, then drift to another group, where you endure a 10-minute lecture from an elderly woman about the moral decline of young people who read French novels. Fact of the day, these outdoor social events were designed not just for mingling, but for strategic evaluation. Families watched how young men interacted with others, whether they could hold a conversation, show restraint, flatter without fawning. A man's ability to navigate a group setting said more than a dozen letters of recommendation. Quirk of the day. In some regions, young ladies carried little journals to record flowers and their meanings during garden events. A violet tucked behind the ear might symbolise modesty, while a rose held too long could be interpreted as flirtation. It was like botanical code switching for the emotionally constipated. Debate of the day. Scholars still argue whether women in these situations were truly choosing their partners, or simply choosing between acceptable options. Autonomy was relative. Yes, they could reject someone, but the pull was often controlled by family, wealth, and reputation. The freedom to say no meant little if you couldn't say yes to someone outside your station. The day winds down. You manage another moment with Eleanor, brief but significant. She mentions that she's tired of Lady Pembroke's gardens. They're beautiful, she admits, but overly curated, not a single tree left to grow wild. You ask where she'd rather be. She pauses. Somewhere quieter, where nobody watches quite so closely. Her voice is soft. Her cousin pretends not to hear. You offer to fetch her a drink. Lemonade is being served from a silver table near the fountain, but she declines. Another time, she says with a hint of finality. Not rejection, not disinterest, just careful. As the gathering begins to dissolve into farewells and whispered gossip, you find yourself wondering if you passed whatever silent tests were being conducted today. You didn't stumble, you didn't brag, you didn't challenge anyone to pistols at dawn, but then again you didn't exactly shine either. You played it safe. That night you sit in your room, staring at the same pile of calling cards you've shuffled 100 times. Eleanor's name isn't among them, of course. You don't even know if she has her own yet. Young ladies rarely needed them. Their value wasn't declared on cardstock. It was whispered, watched, and weighed like a secret currency. Still, there's something about her that won't quite let go of your mind. Not the way she looks, though that certainly helps, but the way she seems to see, the way she asks about things that matter to her. Not just what she's supposed to the way she resists the game even while playing it expertly. You wonder how much longer she'll be allowed to do that. And more importantly, how long you can keep up. By now, you've begun to understand something unspoken but vital. In Regency courtship, actual words are not the primary form of communication. It's not what's said aloud that matters. No, that would be too easy, too modern. Instead, meaning drips from the tilt of a fan, the angle of a bonnet, the choice of gloves, the colour of the gloves, and, most maddening of all, the timing of a glance. Entire conversations happen in silence, with silk, lace, and side-eyes doing all the talking. You, meanwhile, are still trying to decode whether it meant anything that Eleanor wore grey satin instead of blue yesterday. Is she signalling emotional distance? Mourning a pet? Or did she just like the way it matched her shoes? Today's lesson begins in the drawing room of Mrs. Hargrave's townhouse, where you've been invited for a genteel little gathering. It's not quite a party, and certainly not a ball. It's what the upper classes like to call an intimate morning at home, which really just means sitting very still in a circle while someone plays a harp and everyone else pretends to enjoy it. You arrive on time, nod to the footman with the permascowl, and are ushered into a room that smells faintly of lavender, burnt sugar, and social tension. A tea tray sits untouched in the corner, flanked by delicate cups that could shatter from a sneeze. There are 6 ladies present and 4 gentlemen. The seating is deliberate. Oh yes, never believe for a second it's random. You're placed on a fainting couch beside Miss Harriet Dobson, who seems nice enough, but laughs like a goose being surprised. Eleanor, of course, is across the room, perched next to Lord Finchley, who is either whispering something dazzling or explaining the proper method for polishing a saddle. It's hard to tell. You try not to stare, but it's impossible not to watch her. She's wearing ivory gloves today, soft and fitted. Her fan rests lightly in her lap, unopened for now. Her posture, as always, is exquisite, but her expression, it's distant, detached. She's listening to Lord Finchley with the polite disinterest of someone enduring a sermon in a language they don't speak. Miss Dobson offers you a comment about the weather. You agree, say something about how the clouds looked dramatic this morning, and she nods as if you've just quoted Shakespeare. You suspect you could say anything, the cows are planning a revolution, and receive the same expression of approval. She's not here for substance. She's here to be seen being agreeable, and that's the trick, isn't it? None of this is spontaneous. Every gesture, every smile, every flutter of lace is part of a highly stylized script. But occasionally there's a glitch. A dropped glove, a stifled laugh, a too long glance. That's where the truth leaks through. The music begins. Someone's cousin plays the harp with great seriousness and very little talent. The room stiffens with forced appreciation. You risk a glance at Eleanor. Her eyes flick to yours for less than a second. Then back to Finchley. Then to her fan. And then, subtly, like the smallest breath of wind, she taps the closed fan once against her knee. You freeze. Was that a signal? You remember something Geoffrey once said, back when he was mocking everything. Watch their fans. That's the real conversation. At the time you thought he was being theatrical, but now you wonder. The fan, closed and resting, is supposed to signal disinterest. But a deliberate tap? That's different. That's a deviation. That might even be a message. Fact of the day, the Regency era language of the fan was a real, if slightly overstated, set of gestures used by women to convey interest, rejection, or warning. Opening the fan wider could mean wait for me. Dropping it might suggest we are being watched. A slow draw across the cheek? That was the romantic equivalent of a firework. Scholars still argue whether these codes were widely used or mostly the invention of etiquette manuals and over-enthusiastic debutantes. Quirk of the day. Gloves weren't just a fashion accessory. They were a romantic litmus test. Wearing gloves signalled distance, modesty, and control. Removing a glove during a conversation could suggest comfort, flirtation, or, depending on the circumstances, scandalous intimacy. A bare hand was never just a bare hand. Debate of the day. Historians are divided on whether the social restrictions of this era suppressed romantic communication or simply made it more creative. Some argue that repression bred inventiveness, that lovers found secret ways to express emotion through clothing, coded language, and symbolic gestures. Others believe it just made everyone nervous and emotionally constipated. After the music ends, polite clapping fills the room. A tray of sweet biscuits is passed around. Miss Dobson takes one with all the enthusiasm of a nun choosing between sins. You accept a biscuit, but your attention never leaves Eleanor. She seems, for a moment, just slightly more animated, smiling, talking more than usual. You'd suspect genuine interest if it weren't directed at Finchley. Or is it? Because then, as she laughs at something he says, probably a joke about breeches or foxes, she lowers her fan across her lap again and, with slow deliberation, lifts her hand to adjust her glove. She tugs at the fingers, not to remove it, but to smooth it down twice, then rest her hand on her thigh. You stare, trying not to stare. Geoffrey's voice echoes in your head again. If she adjusts her glove while looking away, she's trying not to show interest. If she doesn't adjust it, she's made up her mind. So what is this? A maybe? A test? A call to action? You don't move, not yet, but you feel it. A shift. The rhythm of the room changes, just slightly. The rest of the conversation floats around you like mist. But you and Eleanor, you're not speaking, not touching, not even in the same seating area, and still you're the ones talking the most. You stay exactly 25 minutes longer. You do not speak directly to Eleanor, and she doesn't seek you out. And yet when you rise to leave and offer your farewell to the room, she inclines her head, not toward Finchley, not toward her hostess, but toward you. So small a motion it could be a trick of posture, but it's not. You know it. She knows it. You leave the Hargrave home with a biscuit in your pocket, crumbs on your sleeve, and the sense that something invisible just snapped into place between you. No declarations, no letters, not even a single shared sentence. Just gloves, fans, and the slow, quiet unfolding of something that might just be affection. It begins with tea. Everything does, really. In Regency England, tea isn't just a beverage. It's a ritual, a performance, a way to size someone up with boiling water and porcelain. And this time you're the one being invited to perform. You've been asked to take tea with the Marchmonts, not the family as a whole, just Eleanor, her mother, and the dreaded aunt with the monocle and a voice like sleet on a tin roof. The invitation comes handwritten, thick cream paper folded into precise thirds. No wax seal. That would be too formal. But the handwriting is unmistakably Eleanor's. Strong, elegant, and just the tiniest bit impatient, as if the ink itself is saying, do try to act normal, won't you? You accept, of course. Not responding would be social suicide, and besides, you've been waiting for this moment ever since you noticed her gloves weren't entirely practical last week. A tea visit is significant. It's private but proper. It's observed but offers the illusion of intimacy. If a promenade in the park is like chess in the open air, then this is high-stakes poker, played with porcelain cups and small sharpened smiles. You arrive precisely on time, not early, that's eager. Not late, that's careless. You're greeted by a new footman, one who looks young enough to be mildly terrified of everyone and everything. He takes your hat and coat as though they might explode. You're led into the drawing room, which is lit by a fire too small for comfort and a window too wide for warmth. Eleanor rises as you enter, and you realise with a twist of something unhelpfully emotional that she looks nervous too. That, somehow, is worse than if she were aloof. Her mother remains seated, a porcelain cup balanced on one palm like it was grown there. The aunt sits stiffly to the side, her monocle gleaming with barely restrained suspicion. You half expect her to hiss. "Mr. Barrington," Mrs. Marchmont says with the politeness of someone introducing a garden tool, "thank you for joining us." You bow. Eleanor gestures toward the chair opposite her, and you take it carefully. The china on the table is Wedgwood, subtle, expensive, a quiet flex. You're handed a cup. The tea is strong, slightly bitter, and dangerously hot. You sip it with caution, as if you're being tested, because, well, you are. For the first few minutes, the conversation is pure theatre. You discuss the weather, the dreadful mud in the North Fields, the rather scandalous behaviour of a goose at Lady Radley's last week. Everyone smiles with the tightness of someone holding in a sneeze. But then, slowly, things shift. Eleanor begins to speak more freely. She mentions a pamphlet she read about women's education. Radical stuff, really. suggesting women should be taught arithmetic beyond household accounts. Her mother stiffens. Her aunt coughs. You, sensing danger and opportunity, say, "I think it's admirable. Everyone should know how numbers work, especially if we expect them to manage estates." Eleanor glances at you with something like appreciation. Her mother stirs her tea with too much force. You're in. Fact of the day, afternoon tea in Regency England wasn't quite the frilly affair it later became in Victorian times, but it was still a structured social event. Hosting a gentleman for tea, especially one-on-one or in a small group, was a clear sign of interest or at the very least evaluation. Conversations during these visits could weigh more heavily than letters or dances when families were considering courtship progression. Quirk of the day. Sugar cubes, though common today, weren't widely used during this time. Sugar came in dense cones that had to be hacked off with special sugar nippers. Guests might bring their own sugar nippers to tea, tiny ornate scissors used with the same delicacy as a fencing foil. Imagine a world where flirtation involves joint sugar snipping. Debate of the day. Scholars differ on whether these drawing room tea visits were empowering or stifling for women. Some argue that they gave young ladies a space to speak more directly and form connections under relatively safe conditions. Others claim it was simply another setting where women were expected to charm, smile, and agree politely until told they could marry or leave the room. The aunt eventually speaks. "Mr. Barrington," she says, adjusting her monocle like she's about to deliver a verdict, "do you shoot?" You're not sure if this is a question or a warning. You nod. "When necessary." "Necessary for what?" "For impressing a future father-in-law, I suppose," you reply, then instantly panic at the boldness of your joke. There's a pause. Eleanor bites her lip, clearly suppressing a laugh. Her mother lifts one brow. The aunt snorts, a sound like a cat disapproving of milk, and says, "At least you're honest. Most young men lie about their aim." You exhale. The rest of the visit flows more easily after that. Eleanor mentions a concert happening next week. You take the hint. Her mother does not offer an invitation, but she doesn't forbid the idea either. This, in courtship terms, is a small green light hidden behind thick velvet curtains. As the tea dwindles and the fire fails to do anything useful, you rise to leave. Eleanor stands as well, following you to the hall under the polite excuse of fetching something from the side table. Her mother remains seated, but you can feel her watching through the walls. "You handled that well," Eleanor says, voice low. "My aunt once made a clergyman cry into his cake." "She was only warming up," you reply. Eleanor smiles. Her eyes flick down to your gloves, then up to your face. "There's a botanist coming to the concert next week. He's promised to explain the romantic properties of certain flowers. Useful, you say, in case anyone's trying to say something without saying it." She doesn't answer. She just tilts her head, as if she's studying the space between your words. Then she hands you a small item, a book of poetry. Byron, but annotated. The corners are worn, the spine slightly cracked. You open it to find one page dog-eared. The poem? She walks in beauty. Of course, but she's undersigned only one line. "A heart whose love is innocent." She doesn't explain. She doesn't need to. You take it. Bow. Walk out of the Marchmont house with the sense that you've been handed something far more dangerous than a pistol or a proposal. You've been handed a heart, encoded verse and borrowed ink, and now the question is what you'll do with it. You tuck the book inside your coat and brace yourself, because the concert is coming, and every flower in that room will be watching. You've always thought the phrase marriage market sounded a bit dramatic, but now, standing beneath the towering glass dome of Lady Cresswell's conservatory, watching mothers eye potential sons-in-law like they're evaluating prize pigs, you realise the phrase doesn't go far enough. This is not just a market. It's a finely tuned battlefield, complete with invisible snipers, whispered sabotage, and alliances made over cold finger sandwiches. You're not just a suitor anymore, you're a commodity. The concert, of course, is only part of the performance. Tonight's real function is matchmaking, with violins as background noise. The room hums with delicate attention. Candlelight flickers across polished marble floors. The air is heavy with perfume, lilac, rosewater, and some violent citrusy concoction that must have been created by mistake but worn with total confidence. Above all this, conversations buzz, polite, clipboard, and vicious in their subtext. You're dressed in your best, again. At this point, your wardrobe has become a strategy. The coat is navy, the cravat freshly starched, and you've gone with the waistcoat that Eleanor once called tastefully daring. which is the Regency equivalent of being told you looked mildly intriguing once in your life. You carry her Byron book in your inner coat pocket, its dog-eared page pressing against your chest like a secret. You scan the room. Eleanor is not here yet. Instead, you're immediately intercepted by Mrs. Chudley, a formidable widow known for collecting gossip and eligible men in equal measure. She drapes herself across your arm and begins a low, meandering commentary about everyone in the room. That's Miss Greenleigh still hasn't had a second season. Lord Bertram's daughter, tragic ankles. And over there, the vicar's niece cried during a Handel aria. Unacceptable. You nod, feign polite interest, and try not to look like you're scanning for a very specific lavender dress. Then she arrives. Eleanor steps into the room like it's hers. She's not the most elaborately dressed. There are girls wearing entire gardens sewn into their bodices, but she stands out. Her gown is pale sea foam, elegant and unfussy. Her hair is twisted into something that looks simple but clearly took hours. Her expression is calm, curious, and just a touch dangerous. Your heart does something ridiculous in your chest. Before you can move toward her, Lord Finchley swoops in. Of course, he's wearing something aggressively embroidered and looks as if he's never had an insecure thought in his life. He bows, Eleanor curtsies, and the game begins. You linger nearby, stuck in conversation with a man who's explaining the decline of British coin weight with aggressive hand gestures. You nod along, but you're not listening. You're watching. And then it happens. Eleanor glances your way. A flicker of the eyes, a pause in conversation. She touches the flowers at her neckline, white violets. You don't know what that means, not exactly, but you will find out. You excuse yourself from the coin enthusiast and make your approach. The music begins, a quartet of strings, soft and elegant, something Italian and mournful. Mr. Barrington, Eleanor says as you reach her. I was beginning to think you'd been conscripted into the Navy. I was nearly abducted by a lecture on metallurgy, you say. It was touch and go for a moment. She laughs softly. Finchley, now dismissed, vanishes into the crowd. Muttering something about oranges, you offer your arm. She takes it. You walk together toward the conservatory's edge, where palm trees rustle in warm, stagnant air and candlelight glints off glass. It's not private, nothing is, but it's the closest you'll get to solitude with 50 people pretending not to stare. I believe you brought a book, she says quietly. You tap your coat pocket. I was told certain flowers might require translation. She smiles, then grows serious. You do understand how many are watching us right now. You nod. I stopped counting after your aunt glared at me through her lorgnette, like I was a questionable painting. Good, she says. That means I can do this. She reaches out and lightly touches the edge of your sleeve. A fleeting gesture, technically meaningless. But in this room, it's the equivalent of announcing an engagement. Fact of the day, the so-called marriage market of Regency England referred to the season, a series of events where young women were presented, evaluated, and, if all went well, engaged. It was a system where wealth, lineage, and public behaviour carried more weight than affection. A debutante was essentially a walking resume in ribbons. Quirk of the day, flowers carried coded meanings in the language of floriography. White violets, the ones Eleanor wore, typically symbolised modesty and innocence. But depending on arrangement and placement, they could also suggest hidden affection, or even veiled defiance, especially when pinned over the heart. Debate of the day. While some argue the marriage market dehumanised relationships, others suggest it offered women an opportunity to negotiate social power in subtle but real ways. A clever woman could decline matches, sway opinion, or manipulate gossip to her advantage, if she knew the rules well enough. The music swells, couples begin to dance. You don't ask Eleanor to join you, yet. That would be too obvious. Instead, you talk. About flowers, as promised. About gardens, then books, then family. She asks about your sister, you ask about hers. You both avoid anything that sounds like commitment, but everything underneath is tension and invitation. I wonder, she says, watching a pair twirl across the floor, how many of them even like each other? You glance across the room. The answer is, not many. I'd settle for someone I didn't bore, you reply. And I, she says, would settle for someone who listens. You want to say I'm listening, but it sounds too much like a vow. Instead, you say, and let's promise not to be boring, at least not together. She smiles. I think that can be arranged. The rest of the evening is a blur. You dance once, only once, so as not to create gossip that burns down half the county. But the moment your hands meet, everything else fades. Her gloves are thin, her palm warm, and for those 3 minutes, you're no longer part of the market, the ritual, the endless scrutiny. You're just dancing. You walk her to her mother's carriage afterward, say goodnight under the watchful eye of a sleepy driver, and tuck the Byron book back into your coat as you step into the cold night air. You feel ridiculous. You feel elated. You feel like this might actually be something more than strategy and silk and subtlety. You feel like you're in trouble, because the market doesn't care about feelings, and someone, somewhere, is already whispering. You don't see her for 5 days, not because you've done anything wrong, at least you don't think you have, but because it's Tuesday through Saturday, and the Marchmont calendar is a maze of engagements, dinners, garden parties, and charitable functions hosted by people with names like Lady Wattleberry and Colonel Fiddlesticks. Every time you ask around, someone says, "Oh, they were just at Richmond," or "You missed them. They were visiting the Pembrokes this morning." Or, most annoying of all, "Eleanor? I think she's preparing for the charity whist night. Dreadful cards, there's some delightful cake." You begin to feel like a bloodhound chasing perfume trails. Her presence lingers, on lips, in chatter, in the scent of lavender that hangs in a room she left 20 minutes before you arrived. But she herself? Always one step out of reach. You finally catch up with her at a country house party hosted by Sir James Langley, a man who owns more waistcoats than you have socks and has absolutely no indoor voice. It's a 2-day event, a rustic getaway, they say, as if rustic means anything when there are marble statues in the hedge maze and footmen serving wine in the orchard. You're invited along with half the eligible population of the county. Geoffrey, of course, comes too, charming every chaperone and irritating you by appearing completely unbothered by everything. The house is large, cold, and full of portraits that glare disapprovingly at the furniture. Most of the men gather in the billiards room or the library, pretending to have opinions about poetry. Most of the women retire early or wander the gardens, supervised by companions who specialise in killing conversation with a single look. Then someone suggests a game of whist. You agree because it seems like a good way to sit across from Eleanor without raising suspicion. By some miracle, or perhaps by subtle orchestration, you and Eleanor end up at the same table, across from each other. Partners, the cards are dealt to deals. You try not to make a fool of yourself. Eleanor plays well. Not brilliantly, not enough to seem calculating, but with quiet competence and the occasional side glance that nearly derails your concentration. Once, as you fumble an obvious move, she coughs softly and raises one eyebrow. Not mocking, not scolding, just enough to remind you that she knows exactly what she's doing. As the hands continue, the chatter around the room fades into background noise. You're aware of the gentle rustle of gowns, the clink of teacups, the low hum of someone attempting to tune a harp in the hallway for reasons unknown. But your focus is on Eleanor, the way she places each card with quiet confidence, the way she pauses just before speaking as if weighing every syllable. You realise that you've played 5 rounds and have no idea whether you've won or lost. After the game, you step out onto the terrace with your drink and the faint hope of catching a moment alone. The sky is streaked with clouds, the moon casting long shadows across the garden. And then, there she is, not by accident this time. Standing at the far end of the terrace, hands folded behind her back, head tilted as if listening to something distant and private. You join her. "I'm afraid I wasn't a very good partner," you say, half smiling. She turns to you, eyes soft. You are distracted. It happens. "I believe the term is hopelessly preoccupied." She raises an eyebrow. "With the cards?" "Not exactly." There's a pause. Not the awkward kind. This one's comfortable, humming with unsaid things. You both know you're pushing the limits. This conversation is not technically appropriate, but you're alone, technically. The garden is empty. The chaperones are inside, distracted by sherry and speculation. "I was thinking," Eleanor says suddenly, "how strange it is that everyone assumes this." She gestures to the house, the party, the curated little world you're both trapped in, is what we all want, that this is enough. You nod. The season is like a stage. You act out the scenes until someone offers you a role for life. And if you forget your lines, then you get replaced. She laughs, low and surprised. That's rather bleak. It's Tuesday, you reply. I allow myself some bleakness. Fact of the day, house parties in Regency England were multi-day affairs, often used to foster intimacy in a controlled setting. Guests were selected not just for social compatibility, but for strategic purposes. A well-timed pairing at dinner, a conveniently placed seat at cards. These moments were designed to allow couples to get to know one another without ever being truly alone. Quirk of the day, card games, particularly whist, were a courtship staple. They allowed for subtle interaction, shared glances, whispered strategy, little jokes, without violating the rules of propriety. Partners were often assigned based on quiet matchmaking, and certain moves were interpreted, rightly or wrongly, as signs of flirtation or disinterest. Debate of the day. Some argue that house parties offered more freedom for genuine romance, thanks to their more relaxed structure and longer duration. Others believe they simply raised the stakes, forcing people into close quarters and pressuring them into decisions they weren't ready to make. The line between affection and obligation could blur quickly. You and Eleanor continue talking, voices low. She tells you about a book she read once about a woman who disguised herself as a man to travel. You tell her about the time you tried to impress a girl by climbing a tree and fell into a pig trough. She laughs, really laughs, and for the first time it doesn't feel like you're tiptoeing through a minefield. It feels like you're talking, and then the spell breaks. A rustle behind you, a cough. You both straighten instantly. The maid, not Eleanor's usual one, but another. Young, quick, definitely watching. She murmurs something about Lady Cresswell requesting Eleanor's presence in the blue salon, and just like that, she's gone. You don't sleep well that night. Your room is cold, the blanket's too stiff, the moon too bright. You lie awake replaying the conversation, wondering if you crossed some unspoken line or just danced right up to it. In the morning, Eleanor is nowhere to be seen at breakfast. Her mother appears, calm and unreadable. Finchley is there, of course, loudly retelling a story about a swan attacking a footman. You eat your toast without tasting it. But before the party ends and everyone begins departing in carriages and clouds of polite farewells, you receive a note. It's folded carefully and passed to you under the guise of returning your misplaced handkerchief. The handwriting is, again, unmistakably hers. It reads, "Last night was not enough. I wish it could be, but I still want to see how the story ends." It's unsigned. It doesn't need to be. You carry her note in your waistcoat pocket for 3 days like it's some kind of holy relic. You don't show it to anyone, not even Geoffrey, who would undoubtedly try to fold it into a paper bird or use it to light a cigar in some ironic statement about love and fireplaces. You just keep it close, folded carefully, the crease worn from your fingers tracing it over and over. You've memorized the line. "Last night was not enough. I wish it could be, but I still want to see how the story ends." You've read it in the morning light by candle at night, and once when you accidentally spilled gravy on your sleeve and needed to feel like less of a disaster. But even with her words in your pocket and her gaze still haunting your thoughts, reality creeps back in. And reality, in Regency England, is often a man with an account book, a pedigree chart, and a very strong opinion about dowries. It starts with your mother. Of course it does. She comes into breakfast with that look on her face, that one where her lips are smiling but her eyes are doing long division. She pours tea, adds sugar, and says casually, "I had a visit from Lady Marchmont yesterday." You freeze mid-bite. "She spoke highly of you," your mother continues, stirring her tea as if it's a cauldron, "and of Eleanor. She also spoke, less highly, of Lord Finchley, which I found very interesting. Did you know he owns property in Ireland?" "Ireland, darling?" You nod slowly. You didn't know, but you're not quite sure what this is yet. Gossip, warning, approval? She also mentioned, your mother adds, looking directly at you now, that Eleanor's dowry is somewhat modest. There it is. The price tag. This is the part of courtship that never makes it into the poetry, the negotiation, the ledger balancing, the math of love. Because you can't just like someone. You can't even just love someone. Not openly. Not if the numbers don't add up. Marriage is a business. It always has been. You try to keep your tone even. And how modest is modest? "She would bring £4,000, your mother replies. Less than half what you might expect from a match in her circle. You do the arithmetic in your head. Dowry, family expectations, your own finances. And the number doesn't look great. Your estate is decent, but not grand. You're the eldest, but not the richest. And your uncle's inheritance, still tied up in litigation with his fourth wife, It's not a concern for me, of course, your mother adds. In that way, mothers say things that mean the exact opposite. But others might reconsider. You spend the rest of the day in a daze. Not because you're surprised. Money has always been part of the equation, but because you didn't think it would matter to you. Not with Eleanor. You thought foolishly that affection might trump arithmetic. Fact of the day. In Regency England, a woman's dowry wasn't just a wedding gift, it was an economic foundation for the marriage. It could influence where the couple lived, how they lived, and whether the groom could maintain or improve his estate. Love was negotiable. Finances were not. Quirk of the day. Sometimes dowries were promised in strange forms. Tracts of land, cases of Madeira wine, even racehorses. One notorious dowry included a rare parrot said to speak 3 languages. It didn't. Another involved lifetime access to a private mineral spring, which the groom's family promptly sold. Debate of the day. Historians disagree on how heavily dowries influence marriage choices. Some believe they were decisive, particularly among the gentry and nobility. Others argue that while money mattered, social standing, character, and even genuine compatibility often won out, at least when the gap wasn't too wide. By afternoon, you've spoken to Geoffrey about it. He listens without interrupting, then says flatly, "Would you rather have a wealthy wife you can't talk to, or a modest one who looks at you like you invented sunlight?" You consider this for a long moment. "Do I have to choose now?" Geoffrey shrugs. If you wait too long, the question answers itself. The next day, you take a walk through town. You pass the hatmaker, the apothecary, a pastry shop that's probably a front for matchmaking. Everyone in there looks like they're pretending not to watch each other. You think about calling on Eleanor, but decide against it. You need to think, but thinking is a trap. Thinking leads you in circles, about Eleanor's gaze, her voice, her laugh that's too rare to waste. About her mother's carefully chosen words. About Finchley still circling, with his estates and his sneer and his never-ending commentary about horse breeding. You return home to find a letter waiting. Not from Eleanor, from her father. It's formal, precise, and heavy, not in weight, but in tone. He invites you to discuss prospects. It doesn't mention Eleanor's name, it doesn't need to. You stare at the letter for a full minute before you set it aside. The next morning you ride out. Not to the Marchmont estate, not yet. You ride for the sake of it, through muddy lanes and skeletal trees, until your boots are soaked and your thoughts are wrung dry. When you finally stop, you're outside a church. Not for divine inspiration, just because the bench outside it looks like it might hold a man who's dangerously close to falling apart. And you wonder, not for the first time, how many men before you sat on benches like this, wrestling with the same question. Can I afford to marry the person I actually care about? You go home soaked, sore, and no closer to an answer. But you know this, the ledger says one thing, your gut says another. And Eleanor said she wants to see how the story ends. You just have to figure out how to write the next chapter without selling your soul. You wake to rumours, not official letters, not formal announcements, just murmurs carried on the ribbons of passing conversations and the sharp whispers of matrons too discreet to speak plainly and too delighted not to spread scandal. Apparently, Lord Finchley was seen driving his curricle toward the Marchmont estate early this morning, alone, with flowers. Flowers, for heaven's sake, in November. You hear this from Mrs. Dunning, the local queen of well-meaning malevolence, who tells you in the tone of someone breaking tragic news about a dying houseplant. Yes, quite the gesture, don't you think? A bit forward, perhaps. But Eleanor is such a practical girl. I suppose she needs someone with a strong position after all. You say nothing, smile vaguely, but your jaw aches from holding it shut. You retreat to your study and stare out the window. The trees have gone bare now, skeletal fingers clawing at the wind. Even the garden looks resentful. You think about the letter from Eleanor's father still sitting unopened in your drawer. You think about Lord Finchley handing over hothouse roses with a smug bow and a clear line of intent. You wonder, again, how much longer you have before the ground shifts beneath your feet. By noon, you've had enough. You saddle your horse and ride out, not toward the Marchmont estate this time, but into town. You tell yourself it's to get air, to be seen, to prove to no one in particular that you are not rattled. But you are rattled. You're a box full of angry bees with nowhere to fly. The streets are unusually busy. It's market day and everyone seems louder than usual. more vibrant, more alive. You buy a bag of chestnuts from a vendor and don't eat them. You nod to 3 different acquaintances and forget their names the moment they walk away. And then, just as you're turning to leave, you spot her. Eleanor, she's on foot, walking briskly through the square with her cousin at her side. Not the terrifying aunt, thankfully, just the cousin. The one who knows when to hang back and when to pretend to tie a shoe for 15 extra seconds. Eleanor is bundled in a wool cloak, her bonnet snug against the wind, and her cheeks flushed from the cold. Your heart reacts before your mind catches up. You cross the square in what you hope is a measured stroll. She sees you approaching and slows just a fraction. Enough. "Mr. Barrington," she says with that calm, amused tone you've come to associate with both fondness and danger. "Out braving the market crowd?" "I came for chestnuts and minor humiliation," you reply. "Achieved both." Her cousin drifts politely away to examine some turnips that do not warrant examination. You and Eleanor stand close enough to feel the tension rise like fog off the cobblestones. This is not an accident. This is not a game. You don't know if she's heard the rumours, but from the way she's looking at you, you suspect she's heard everything. "I imagine you've been busy," you say carefully. She tilts her head. "Not unusually." "Anyone call recently?" She lifts a brow. "You're asking if Lord Finchley brought me flowers." You pause. "I was hoping not to ask, but yes," she sighs, her breath frosting in the air. "He did." "And?" "I handed them to my mother," she replies, eyes locked on yours. "She has more use for roses than I do." The knot in your chest loosens just slightly. "And it's good to know you care," she adds, almost playfully. You glance around. People are watching, always watching. No one's openly stinning, but you can feel the attention prickling across your back like static. You and Eleanor speaking alone is not scandalous, but it's certainly being noted. And that's when a voice calls out across the square. "Mr. Barrington, come for news, have you?" "It's Finchley." Of course it is. He's standing beside his carriage, impeccably dressed and grinning like a man who thinks he's won something. His horse snorts as if it's embarrassed to be associated with him. "Lovely day for a stroll, Miss Marchmont," Finchley adds, tipping his hat as he walks over, oblivious to the way the atmosphere has instantly thickened. "Lord Finchley," she replies, polite and lukewarm. He turns to you. "I imagine the market's not what it once was. So many choices, but so few worthy investments." You smile, but it doesn't reach your eyes. "Some of us aren't looking to invest, just to connect," Finchley chuckles. "Ah, but emotion is a volatile currency, my dear Barrington. Prone to inflation." Eleanor breaks the tension by stepping between you quite literally and saying, "I must return home. If you gentlemen would excuse me." She curtsies. Finchley bows too deeply. You nod and step aside. But as she walks past you, her hand brushes yours. Just for a second, deliberate, soft, enough to remind you who's choosing and who's being chosen. Fact of the day. In the Regency era, reputation was everything. One poorly timed word, one perceived slight, one whispered rumour could ruin a courtship or an entire family's social standing. It wasn't just about what you did, it was about what people thought you did. Quirk of the day. Rumours often spread through something called visiting cards with remarks. A calling card would be left with a penciled note, passed from household to household like social telegrams. It was how gossip moved faster than actual letters. Debate of the day. Did public reputation truly reflect private character in the Regency period? Some historians argue that maintaining a spotless reputation required ruthless self-editing. Others suggest that everyone played the same game, and judged each other more for how they handled scandal than whether they avoided it altogether. After Eleanor disappears down the lane, Finchley turns back to you. "She's clever," he says. "Too clever for a soft heart." You glance sideways at him. "And yet here we both are." Finchley's smile falters, just slightly. You tip your hat and walk away. Chestnuts forgotten, heart suddenly lighter than it's been in days. Because Eleanor is still here, still choosing. And as long as that's true, well, the rumours can howl all they like. By the time you reach your front door the next morning, there's already a letter waiting for you. Not from Eleanor, she's far too clever for something so traceable, but from your cousin Geoffrey, who has scrawled it in his usual elegant chaos of ink and sarcasm. He's invited you to join him for an impromptu ride to clear the air, stretch the legs, and possibly flee from a mutual engagement rumour that may or may not involve your name. You read it twice, then you read it a third time because of the postscript. Pack a small bag, nothing ominous, just a precaution. You know what this is about before you even find your boots, the whispers have thickened. Eleanor and you have been seen together too many times now. The handbrush at the market didn't go unnoticed, and people, especially bored, well-dressed people with too much time, have begun spinning possibilities out of passing glances and bits of lace. If you don't make a move soon, someone else might make it for you. You ride out with Geoffrey just before midday. The weather dry but indecisive, clouds moving like slow thoughts across the sky. You don't ask where you're going. He doesn't tell you. That's how Geoffrey works. Half gamesman, half guardian angel, always just on the edge of scandal and somehow never pulled in. Eventually, you slow the horses near the ridge where the hills roll out like lazy parchment. It's quiet here, private, and slightly too scenic not to be suspicious. You dismount. Geoffrey tosses you a canteen and sits on a fallen log like he's been planning this moment for years. Well, he says, you've made a mess of things. You raise an eyebrow. I thought I was doing rather well, actually. He nods, grinning. Exactly. That's the problem. You're doing too well, people are starting to believe you're serious, and in our world, that's when things get bloody. You sigh. She's not just decoration, Jeff. She's not a passing amusement. He sobers at that, nodding once, sharply. I know. The two of you sit in silence for a moment, listening to the wind skim across the grass, birds chirping in the hedges like they're eavesdropping. Then Geoffrey says, You've thought about eloping, haven't you? You don't answer right away, but you don't need to. I thought so, he says, smirking faintly. You've got the eyes for it. That wild, reckless glint of a man who's read too many novels and isn't nearly as good at disguising it as he thinks. You smile despite yourself. It wouldn't be fair to her. No, he agrees, but you'd both enjoy the scandal for about 35 minutes. You look out over the valley. It's not the eloping that tempts you, really. It's the idea of shaking off the scrutiny, the endless math of dowries and family trees. The idea of grabbing Eleanor's hand and leaving, not to Gretna Green, but just somewhere else. Fact of the day. Eloping during the Regency era was more common than you'd think, especially among couples who lacked parental approval or the financial arrangements required for formal marriage. The most infamous destination was Gretna Green, a Scottish village just over the border, where the law allowed couples to marry without the delays and permissions required in England. Quirk of the day, the blacksmith at Gretna Green became a local legend, not for his ironwork, but for officiating elopements. Couples would marry over the anvil, symbolising a union forged like metal. Romantic, maybe. Slightly ridiculous? Absolutely. Debate of the day. Historians still argue whether elopements were acts of true rebellion or just desperation disguised as passion. Some were clearly about love, others were strategic escapes, especially for women whose reputations had been compromised or whose choices were rapidly vanishing. I won't elope, you finally say. She deserves better than that. Geoffrey nods. Good, because the last thing I need is to help hide a couple in my wine cellar again. Long story. Never ask. You ride back into town in thoughtful silence. By the time the cobblestones appear beneath your horse's hooves again, you've made a decision. You're going to speak to Eleanor. Not in passing. Not through fans or gloves or strategic glances. A real conversation. One with questions, one with answers. One that could end in either disaster or a proposal, and you honestly don't know which would be more terrifying. But fate, it turns out, has its own plans. You arrive home to find your mother waiting. Not in the drawing room, not in the garden, in your study. You open the door and freeze. She's seated at your desk, back straight, fingers laced. The letter from Eleanor's father is in front of her. Open, not scandalous, but not great. I had to know, she says, before you can speak. You weren't going to tell me. You close the door quietly behind you, because I hadn't decided. And now, you sit across from her, suddenly feeling very young. Now I have, you say. She waits, you take a breath. I'm going to speak with Eleanor directly, before I answer anyone else, before I do anything else. Her mouth tightens, not disapproval, but not agreement either. She's a fine girl, your mother says, but she's the one, you interrupt, even if the numbers don't add up. Even if there's gossip, even if she walks away, I need to know if she wants this, not her father, not her aunt, not you, her. Your mother studies you for a long, heavy moment, and then she does something rare. She nods. She'll be at the Thurston estate tomorrow, she says. A picnic, informal. I wasn't invited, of course. I'm too intimidating. You blink. How do you know that? She waves a hand. Darling, I know everything. I've been polite long enough. Now it's your turn. You smile, then frown. She might still say no. Yes, your mother replies. She might. And if she does, you will survive. Barely. You leave the study with your pulse racing. Tomorrow. You'll see her tomorrow. And this time you won't leave anything unsaid. The day dawns bright and bitter. A sky the colour of washed-out parchment, and air so sharp it could slice linen. You wake early. Too early. And lie staring at the ceiling, while the weight of what's ahead settles into your chest like a second ribcage. You're going to speak to her today. Truly speak. Not through gloved fingers or veiled comments. Not with family watching or music buffering the silence. It will be clear and real and terrifying. You dress like it matters, because it does. Not too formal, not too casual. You choose a crisp white shirt and a dove grey coat, the same one Eleanor once complimented during a walk when she thought you weren't listening. Your boots are polished until they reflect your anxious expression, and your cravat takes 3 attempts before it stops looking like a panic attack in fabric form. The Thurston estate is a long, slow ride through the countryside, and your horse seems as unimpressed with your nerves as your valet. As you approach the gates, you're greeted by the distant sound of laughter, voices echoing across the open grounds, followed by the faint flutter of music. There's no fanfare, no formal footman. This is a picnic after all, the elite pretending at simplicity. You tether your horse near the edge of the lawn, my soul, where a cluster of other gentlemen are pretending not to scan the crowd for specific bonnets. You recognise a few, Lord Finchley, of course, draped in plaid and false modesty, already holding court near the rose trellis. Lady Cynthia Babur practically glowing in fuchsia and desperation. And then, Eleanor. She's seated on a blanket near a patch of wildflowers, pouring tea for her cousin, laughing at something just out of earshot. Her hair is tied with a ribbon the exact colour of storm clouds before rain. She's radiant, relaxed, and entirely unreachable from where you're standing, until she sees you. Her hand stills mid-pour, her gaze locks on yours. For a heartbeat, the entire picnic fades away, and then she nods, barely, and turns back to her tea. But you've been seen. The door is open. You cross the lawn with the calm of a man marching to either proposal or execution. Your feet feel made of lead and bad decisions. Eleanor doesn't look up again till you're only a few steps away. Mr. Barrington, she says, smiling. Did you come for sandwiches or scandal? Hopefully both, you reply, and she laughs. It's real. Warm. Her cousin glances between you and raises an eyebrow before graciously declaring she needs a walk, and then vanishes toward the apple orchard. You're alone. Not alone, of course. There are 50 other people within hearing range, but alone enough that your heart decides now is the moment to start trying to escape through your ribs. I need to ask you something, you say, keeping your voice low. Ask, she replies, simple as that. No hesitation. You swallow. What do you want, Eleanor? She blinks. That's not the question she was expecting. She shifts on the blanket, adjusting the fold of her skirt, buying time. I'm asking, you continue. Not your father, not your aunt, not society, you. What do you want? She studies you. There's a pause, long but not empty. Then she says, I want a marriage that feels like a partnership, not a performance. I want to be heard, not managed. I want mornings that begin with honesty, not calculations. You exhale just slightly. Do you want that with me? She doesn't smile. She doesn't tease. She just says, I might. And then, before you can reply, a shadow falls over you both. Lord Finchley. He appears like a bad dream at precisely the worst moment, all smug confidence and silk buttons. Ah, Miss Marchmont, he says, with the smoothness of a man who thinks the world owes him a dowry and a duchess. Mr. Barrington. What a cosy little corner you've found. You glance at Eleanor. Her expression is unreadable, but her spine straightens. We were just discussing honesty, she says. It's rare these days. Finchley chuckles. Honesty is a luxury one most of us can't afford. You stand, stepping forward just slightly, enough to signal, not now, not here, but Finchley isn't here to duel with swords. He's here to duel with words. "You know," he says too casually, "I hear Mr. Barrington is being offered quite a generous match elsewhere. Surprising, considering the family circumstances." You stiffen. Eleanor, without missing a beat, says, "And yet he seems to be here." Finchley opens his mouth again, but then Eleanor rises. "Walk with me," she says, turning to you. You nod, offering your arm. She takes it, and you leave Finchley behind in a puff of his own perfume and frustration. You walk the perimeter of the lawn, down toward the tree line where the hedge grows thick and the sun flickers through golden leaves. The quiet stretches between you, not tense, but weighty. "He's going to try to force a public courtship," she says at last. "He's hoping to corner me. And your family. My father has no strong objection. My aunt is practically preening at the thought. My mother is silent. And you?" "I've made no promises," she says, and then glances at you. "But I need something from you before I do." You nod. "Anything." "I need to know," she says softly, "that you'll fight for me if you must. Not run, not hesitate. I need someone who won't fold the moment a better offer arrives." You stop walking. You take her hand. You press something into her palm. It's the Byron book. Her Byron book. You've brought it, wrapped in cloth, guarded in your coat, waiting for this exact moment. She opens it. The same dog-eared page. But now another line is underlined. So soft, so calm, yet eloquent. "I haven't changed my mind," you say, "even if everyone else changes theirs." She looks at you and sees you, truly. Fact of the day. Regency engagements were often sealed, not with proposals but with implication. Public behaviour, social signals, and the silent approval of families could announce a match before either party had spoken the words aloud. But beneath the surface, quiet conversations like this one were where the real commitments were made. Quirk of the day. Some lovers would exchange books, poetry, essays, even gardening manuals, with passages marked or marginalia scribbled to express emotions they couldn't say aloud. A shared book could become an entire love letter in disguise. Debate of the day. Was love ever truly private in the Regency period? Some say that all love was filtered through performance and expectation. Others argue that the very need for secrecy created deeper bonds. Alliances formed not in ballrooms but in glances and barely their touches. Eleanor closes the book. She holds it to her chest for a moment. Then she looks up and smiles. Not broadly, not for show, just enough, just for you. The story, it seems, is far from over. You ride home from the Thursden estate with the soft clench of hope sitting in your chest like a hand that hasn't quite decided to make a fist. It's not victory, it's not defeat. It's something in between, a quiet agreement, a barely spoken understanding, as if you and Eleanor have begun writing a letter in invisible ink and are waiting to see if it dries legibly. You keep replaying her voice in your head, or "I might." You turn the phrase over and over, each time finding something new tucked inside it. It wasn't a promise, but it wasn't nothing. And when she looked at you, really looked, you felt like she could read every half-formed fear inside your skull and still didn't flinch. The next day you write her a letter, not a declaration, nothing foolish or compromising. Just a short note, careful and precise. You write that you valued your walk, that you have something to discuss when and if she is ready. You ask, formally of course, if she might consider granting you a moment of her time at the upcoming assembly. You fold it, you seal it with wax, you do not sign it with anything more than your surname, and you send it by courier who can be trusted to deliver it straight to her cousin's hand. Then you wait. Again. And you wonder while you're waiting if this is the strangest part of love, the in-between. The hours where nothing happens, but everything feels on the edge of happening. You try to distract yourself, you visit your tenants, you read half a page of Gibbon and fall asleep. You spar with Geoffrey using fencing foils and entirely too much ego. Then on the third day, her reply arrives. It's short, barely more than a sentence. "I will be at the assembly. I hope you will be too." And that's it. No salutation, no signature. But she wrote it, in her own hand, and that means something. The night of the assembly arrives in a flourish of silk and candlelight. The ballroom glows with anticipation and gossip. Everyone is watching everyone, especially you. You walk in and feel it. The subtle tilt of heads, the rustle of fans, the tightening of gloves. You're no longer anonymous. You're a man with a known interest, which means you're now a target for both attention and sabotage. You don't see Eleanor immediately. Instead, you spend the first half hour nodding at people you barely know and being offered drinks you don't want. You dance once, politely, with a girl whose name you forget mid-minuet. You nearly trip on the hem of her gown. She doesn't notice. Then you see her. Eleanor enters the ballroom in pale silver, the colour of moonlight on water, and somehow manages to walk as if she's not being watched by every pair of eyes in the building. Her hair is swept up but not stiff, her expression calm but not cold. You have no idea if she spent hours preparing or simply arrived that way. Either seems equally likely. You wait until she's finished her first dance. Then you approach. "Miss Marchmont," you say, bowing. "Mr. Barrington," she replies, with just enough curve to her lips to imply memory. You offer your hand, she accepts. You don't speak during the first part of the dance, not because you're nervous, though you are, but because you're both paying too much attention to everyone else. Each turn and each step, each brush of fingers is catalogued by the room. Your performance is under review. By the second pattern, you can finally speak without being overheard. "I was beginning to worry," you say quietly, "that I wouldn't come, that I'd say too much when you did." She tilts her head. "And have you?" "Not yet." "Are you planning to?" You inhale. Yes. Her eyes don't widen. She doesn't flush or look away. Instead, she says, "Then I suggest you do it soon." The next reel includes Finchley. "And I'm not cruel enough to make him dance with himself." The dance ends. You bow. She curtsies. And then you guide her, not to the refreshments, not to the card tables, but to the edge of the room, just far enough from the crowd to seem casually misplaced. You pause by a floral display the size of a moderately priced horse and lower your voice. "I'd like to call on your family," you say, formally. Eleanor's mouth doesn't move, but her eyes do. They soften slightly, the way they did on the terrace. "And," she says, "and," you continue, "I would like you to know, before I ask anyone else, that it is you I want, not your dowry, not your name, not the approval of anyone else." Fact of the day: proposals in Regency England didn't always come with one knee and dramatic declarations. Often they came in the form of a formal request to call, once mutual interest had been signalled through weeks of courtship and parental consent was probable. The actual "will you marry me" could be quietly implied, rather than extravagantly stated. Quirk of the day: some families kept literal lists of acceptable suitors for their daughters, names written on paper, ranked by income, connections and character. If a name didn't appear, the courtship was discouraged or outright banned, regardless of personal feelings. Debate of the day: scholars continue to debate the idea of choice in Regency courtship. While upper-class women had more control than often assumed, particularly in rejecting offers, the pressure to marry well created a constant tension between personal desire and societal duty. Eleanor doesn't respond immediately. She studies you, the line of your shoulders, the steadiness of your eyes. Then she says, "Do you know what it means to want something that might cost you everything else?" You nod. "I think I'm learning." She breathes out once, then says, "Ask." You step back, bow. "Miss Marchmont, may I have the honour of calling on your family?" She smiles and says, "You may." You don't hear the music, you don't hear the whispers. You don't even care that Finchley is glaring at you from across the room with the intensity of a rejected peacock. Because she said yes. Not to the marriage, not yet, but to you. And that's the beginning of something real. You wake the next morning with the kind of calm usually reserved for people who have been publicly knighted or privately forgiven. The sun is shining, the birds are chirping far too optimistically, and for once the world feels quiet inside your head. Because last night Eleanor said yes. Not yes to a proposal yet, but yes to you. Yes to the next step. And in Regency England, that next step is where things begin to get much, much more dangerous. You're now what they call a man of intention. You're no longer one of the maybes, hovering on the edge of a lady's dance card. You're on the board. You've made your move. Which means, by the rules of this polite high-stakes game, you've declared yourself in a way that everyone can now use against you. You have, in essence, painted a bright red target on your back. It starts almost immediately. You receive 3 notes by noon, each from women you've barely spoken to since Michaelmas, all suddenly interested in having you join them for tea or to admire their family's new conservatory. One includes a suspiciously detailed description of a recent illness that left her so very vulnerable. You suspect Eleanor has received her own set of invitations too, finely dressed, sweetly worded traps. You also suspect she's ignoring them all. Your mother watches you over breakfast with the cautious amusement of someone studying a raccoon that's somehow learned to play chess. "So," she says, pouring tea, "you're calling today?" "I am." "And you're planning to be civil?" "I always am." She hums, clearly not buying it. "Just remember, Mr. Barrington, this is the part where the gentlemen start duelling and the ladies start crying." You don't say it aloud, but you're pretty sure it's the other way around. When you arrive at the Marchmont estate, you're dressed carefully, but not extravagantly. Your coat is midnight blue. The cravat is modest. You look like a man who knows what he wants but doesn't need to shout about it. The butler greets you with his usual expression of mild disapproval, and you're shown into the drawing room, which smells faintly of dried roses and lemon polish. Eleanor's mother is already seated, reading a book she absolutely isn't reading. She rises, offers a tight smile, and motions for you to sit. "You've come to call," she says. "I have." She stares at you. You stare back. The silence stretches. Then Eleanor enters, and everything in the room shifts. She's dressed simply, which is to say strategically. Cream muslin, a soft blue ribbon at her waist. No jewellery, no feathers, nothing to suggest a performance. She sits beside her mother, back straight, hands folded, expression unreadable. You begin, you speak carefully, formally. You state your admiration for Eleanor's character, her wit, her calm, her intelligence. You do not mention her eyes or her laugh or the way she makes silence feel like conversation. You know better. This is not the place for poetry, this is the place for business. Her mother listens, nods once, and then, with the precision of a fencer setting her stance, she says, "And you intend to propose?" Fact of the day, in Regency courtship, intentions were everything. Once a gentleman expressed serious interest, by requesting to call, by dancing too often with the same young lady, or by visiting her family home, society expected him to be either preparing a proposal or preparing to explain why he wasn't. You pause, the room stills. "I do," you say. Her mother's mouth twitches, not quite a frown, not quite a smile. "And do you have the means to support a wife?" Here it is, the ledger question, the one that turns love into arithmetic. "Yes," you answer, comfortably, and I'm in no debt. "And the dowry?" "I'm aware of the terms," you say evenly, "and they don't change my position." She studies you for a long, excruciating second. Then she nods. "I will speak with my husband," she says, "and if Eleanor is in agreement, we'll consider it a suitable match." Eleanor doesn't speak, not yet. You stand, bow, and then her mother leaves the room. It's just you and Eleanor. "I'm sorry you had to say all that aloud," she says after a moment. "I know it feels like submitting to inspection." You glance at her. "You're worth the inspection." She lifts her eyes to yours. "I haven't said yes," she says. "I know. But I haven't said no." "I know that too." She stands, and suddenly you're very aware that you're alone with her in a room without a chaperone in sight. She walks to the window, looks out, then turns. "I've had offers before," she says, "all from men who thought I was a fine ornament for their homes. You're the first who looked at me like I was unfinished. Unfinished. Like a person, not a product, not a role. Like someone still deciding." "You are," you say. "That's why I asked." She steps closer. "Promise me," she says, "that if I say yes, it's because we chose it. Not because our parents brokered a treaty, not because the town expects it, because you and I said so." "I promise." She studies you again, then very softly she reaches out, not to touch you, but to adjust the lapel of your coat, as if she needs to smooth the smallest wrinkle in the moment between decision and declaration. And in that quiet gesture you feel it, the beginning of her answer. Quirk of the day. Regency lovers often couldn't say what they meant, but they found ways. A handkerchief dropped, a flower placed in a glove, even the adjustment of a gentleman's clothing could become a substitute for the words propriety wouldn't let them speak. Debate of the day. Some argue that love in the Regency period was suffocated by formality and social structure. Others believe that the very restrictions created deeper expressions of care, intimacy in restraint, emotions in quiet signs. It wasn't always spoken, but it was often felt. You leave the house not with triumph but with a fragile kind of hope, like carrying a flame through the wind. She didn't say yes, but she's considering you, and that, in this world, is a treasure far rarer than certainty. The next few days unfold like a quiet storm, not loud enough to make the walls rattle, but with just enough pressure in the air to let you know something's about to change. Everywhere you go, people have started treating you a little differently. No one says anything outright, of course not, but the way Mrs. Hargrave greets you with a smile 2 degrees too warm, or the way the vicar's wife asks how your dear Eleanor is keeping, or the way your name suddenly appears in conversations where it has no business being, it all makes things clear. You've crossed into the liminal space between courtship and engagement, a zone fraught with risk, expectation, and the growing sense that every conversation might be the last one you have before someone throws a party in your honour, or drops you like a broken teacup. And then the truly unexpected happens. The prince arrives. Not the Prince Regent himself, obviously. That would require more candles and far more security. No, this is Prince Friedrich of Baden-Schleswig, some distant European cousin of someone who once attended a party with someone who once knew Queen Charlotte's pastry chef. Still, a prince. A real one. And he's in the area for a cultural visit, which is what people call it when minor royalty gets bored and decides to visit the countryside to flirt with eligible women. And guess who he takes an immediate interest in? Eleanor. Of course he does. It starts at a musical evening held at Lady Halbridge's home. You're there, awkwardly nursing a glass of questionable punch and pretending to enjoy a harp solo that sounds like someone dropped a drawer of spoons down the stairs. You're watching the door when the prince walks in, blonde, broad-shouldered, wearing a velvet coat with more embroidery than sense. He's surrounded by a circle of eager hosts and overpreened daughters. You're just thinking he looks like the kind of man who refers to himself in the third person when his eyes land on Eleanor. And then, just like that, he beelines for her. You watch the exchange unfold from across the room. The introductions, the bow, the polite smile. She's calm, gracious, unbothered. But the prince doesn't drift away like most admirers. He stays, he laughs, he gestures with too much confidence. He offers her his arm before the first piece of music ends, and she takes it. Your stomach drops into your shoes. Later, you corner Geoffrey, who's been lurking near the billiards table like a man considering legal arson. "Well," you ask, "what do you make of it?" Geoffrey raises an eyebrow. "She's not swooning." "True. She's also not leaving." "Also true." "She's being polite," he adds, "to a visiting prince. You'd have to be an idiot to snub him. Fortunately, she's not an idiot." "But what if he—" "She won't." You stare into your punch. Fact of the day, during the Regency era, royalty, especially visiting European nobles, were often invited into upper-class social circles as a kind of elite entertainment. Their presence was considered an honour, and a young woman catching a royal's eye, even momentarily, could send her status skyrocketing, though actual marriages were rare. Quirk of the day, the fashion at the time dictated that gentlemen's coats be so tightly tailored, some men had to be sewn into them before events. It's entirely possible Prince Friedrich is being held upright by nothing more than arrogance and 36 brass buttons. Debate of the day. Did high society women actually prefer titled men, or were they simply trained to? Some historians argue that titles came with suffocating expectations, while others point out that marrying up, even marginally, could offer a woman more personal freedom than marrying within her own rigidly monitored class. You don't sleep well that night. Your dreams are a jumbled mess of Eleanor dancing with the prince, of announcements being made without your knowledge, of embroidered coats and foreign accents, and you being quietly edged out of your own story. You try to be reasonable, rational. After all, you have her favour. She chose you, or at least she's on the verge of choosing. But doubt, once invited in, doesn't knock gently. It kicks down the door and starts rearranging furniture. The next day, the rumours begin. You hear it in the tea shop. The prince has asked for Eleanor's company at the botanical gardens. You hear it again at the dressmaker's. He's gifted her a brooch. something German. Very expensive. You hear it whispered by 2 footmen outside the chapel. She'd make a lovely princess, wouldn't she? By noon, you're wondering if you've been outmanoeuvred. You find yourself standing outside the Marchmont estate, unsure if you're about to call on her or stand there like a statue until your dignity erodes. But before you can make a decision, the door opens. And there she is, Eleanor, wearing the same calm expression as always, holding a book, no brooch in short sight. She blinks in surprise, then smiles. "Mr. Barrington, were you about to knock or just admire the wreath?" You let out a breath you didn't realise you were holding. "I heard about the prince," do you say, before you can stop yourself. She steps onto the stoop, closes the door behind her. "Ah," she says, "the rumours are flying." Then, "They are. And you came to find out whether I've run off to be a duchess? Maybe. Well," she says, stepping down to join you, "if I were planning to leave the country, I'd at least have changed my shoes." You glance down, simple walking boots, practical, worn in at the toes. "No brooch?" you ask. She shakes her head. "He offered. I declined. I told him I wasn't a souvenir." You can't help it, you grin, and then, quieter, she adds, "It was flattering, of course, but temporary. I've no interest in being someone's 3-day fancy." You nod, swallowing the last of your insecurity. "I just needed to hear it," you admit. She looks at you for a long moment. "I would have told you," she says, "if I thought you doubted me." "I don't," you say. "Not really. But the prince has a lot of buttons." She laughs. A real one this time. And it's enough to wipe out everything else. Quirk aside, rumour aside, prince aside, she's here. Still Eleanor, still choosing. And this time she reaches for your hand. Not a brush, not a fleeting touch, an actual deliberate hold. And in broad daylight, you feel it like a bell tolling in your chest. She's not just choosing anymore, she's announcing. The thing about being chosen, truly unequivocally chosen, is that it doesn't simplify your life the way stories like to pretend. It complicates it. Suddenly every move you make is under surveillance. Every letter is read too closely, every glance dissected over breakfast tables across 3 counties. The truth is, in Regency England, nothing announces a courtship quite like not denying it. And you and Eleanor are officially not denying a thing. By the following morning, it's as if someone set off a cannon made entirely of lace and speculation. The news spreads with impressive speed. Miss Eleanor Marchmont is seen strolling hand in hand with Mr. Barrington, in daylight, with no obvious distress, not a scandal yet, but a firm indicator, the sort of thing that makes younger sisters giddy and older matrons start calculating wedding invitations in their heads. The Marchmont estate is suddenly a pilgrimage site. Lady Hargrave drops by with a casserole. The vicar's wife arrives with a spiritual tract and absolutely zero interest in leaving. Finchley is reported to have punched a tree and then immediately blamed the tree. You'd feel triumphant if you weren't now facing the most daunting obstacle of them all. The dowry pen. You knew it would come to this. There's no such thing as a marriage, no such thing as love even in the eyes of this society, without a price tag. You can stroll, you can write poetry, you can speak fondly about her virtues until your lungs give out, but eventually you'll be summoned into a quiet room by 2 people who care more about ledgers than sonnets. And that's precisely what happens. You're invited, formally, to dine with the Marchmont family. Not a party, not a tea, dinner, just the parents and you. Eleanor will make a brief appearance, her mother explains, but this is not about her, this is business. You arrive prepared, crisp coat, polished boots, a stomach full of dread and a pocket full of calculations. The drawing room is dim and overly warm. The fire smells like someone tried to burn rose petals out of spite. Lord Marchmont greets you with a smile that doesn't extend to his eyes. "Mr. Barrington," he says, "we're pleased you could join us." "Thank you, sir." "Please sit. Let's speak frankly." Always a good sign. You sit. And then he opens the ledger. Yes, a literal one. He reviews his daughter's assets aloud as if reciting a grocery list. Bonds, a few minor properties in the north, an annuity. Then he clears his throat and says the number. £4,000. You knew it was modest, but hearing it spoken, hearing it stamped into the conversation like a limitation rather than a gift, makes your spine lock up. "I understand your estate is solid," he adds, "but there's no denying this match would be unequal." You nod slowly. Financially, yes. He waits, then says, "And you're still prepared to pursue it?" "I am." He raises an eyebrow. "You've had other offers." "I've had noise. I wouldn't call them offers." "Finchley offered 12. It's not a question. You blink." "I'm aware." And I'm still here." He closes the ledger slowly, as if it pains him to do so. Then he leans forward. "You'll forgive me," he says, "if I find this difficult to understand." You meet his gaze, because it's not practical. Because it's not typical. You're risking a great deal for a marriage that won't improve your station. You could give him the real answer. You could talk about Eleanor's mind, her quiet strength, her sharp wit, the way she sees through the world without ever turning bitter. You could speak for hours. Instead, you just say, "She's the one I want." Fact of the day, dowries in Regency England weren't just traditional, they were legally binding. A dowry could be negotiated like a contract, and many families treated it as insurance against financial instability. A modest dowry didn't necessarily mean poverty, but it could make or break a match in the eyes of a pragmatic family. Quirk of the day, some particularly ambitious families included bizarre dowry clauses, one famously offering £1,000 extra if the groom could produce a male heir within the first year. Others offered conditional estates, which would only be inherited after certain behavioural standards were met. Love, but make it contractual. Debate of the day. Did love ever actually win against finances in the upper classes? Some historians believe yes, that private affections and clever manoeuvring sometimes overrode economic expectation. Others argue that such cases were exceptions, romanticised in letters and novels but exceedingly rare in practice. Lord Marchmont doesn't reply at once. He stands, paces to the window, then says, without turning, "I married Eleanor's mother for money." You glance at the woman in question, who's still seated near the fire, sipping her sherry with the detachment of someone who already knows the story. "It worked," he continues. "We've been fortunate, but I always wondered if she'd chosen someone else. Would she have been happier?" You don't answer. He turns back to you. "I don't understand you," he says, "but Eleanor does." He pours a drink, offers one to you. You accept it. And just like that, the conversation shifts. "Her mother wants a spring wedding," he says. "I told her that's foolish, it will rain." You almost choke on your drink. "She's thinking April," Lady Marchmont adds. "White flowers, something tasteful. You'll be consulted, of course." "Wait, what?" "She'll say yes," Lord Marchmont says. "She hasn't yet, but she will." Thank you, sir." He waves a hand. "It's not approval, just a prediction." Dinner is quiet, and somehow still tense. Eleanor never appears. You begin to suspect she's orchestrated this entire evening from a separate room, possibly with wine. When you finally leave, you're not sure if you've just passed a test or failed one you didn't know you were taking. But when you return home, there's a note waiting for you. It's folded twice, sealed with Eleanor's initials. Inside is a single line, written in her hand. £4,000, and every part of me that matters. Will that be enough? You hold the note for a long time, then you smile. And finally, you let yourself believe that this may actually happen. Not because the numbers worked, but because the people did. The garden is empty, which is ideal, really, because you're about to do something extremely improper. Not in the bodily sense. Your gloves are still on, your cravat is still neatly tied, and your boots have not even brushed the edge of a parlour rug. But emotionally, socially, the thing you're about to attempt in this garden will register somewhere between a minor scandal and an outright violation of polite society. You're going to try to kiss her. You didn't plan it. Not precisely. You certainly didn't scribble it onto a calling card or slip it into a neatly folded note. You've just come for a walk. A post-lunch walk through the back gardens of the Marchmont estate. Supposedly to examine the seasonal transition of hydrangeas, or some other gentle, mindless topic fit for the ears of a chaperone. Eleanor invited you. Her cousin agreed to follow at a respectable distance, which for once she seems to be honouring. You have roughly 12 minutes of privacy, 10 if you count the echoing footsteps on gravel behind you. You glance at Eleanor beside you. She walks steadily, arms folded neatly behind her back, expression unreadable. She's dressed in a deep green cloak that looks like it was spun from early twilight. Her bonnet is trimmed in black lace. She's been quiet for most of the walk but not cold. Thoughtful, like she's composing a sentence in her mind and hasn't quite decided on the punctuation. "You know," you say, breaking the silence gently, "this is the same path we walked during the rose season." She nods, lips barely curving. "You were terrible at small talk then." "And now?" "Improved," she admits, "though you still lean too hard on weather observations. I'll try to reference agriculture more." She laughs softly, but her steps slow as you reach the old stone bench tucked beneath the ash tree. The air smells faintly of fading leaves and damp earth. The sun has slipped behind a curtain of clouds, softening everything into a muted, perfect grey. She stops. You stop. The cousin stops too, somewhere far enough back to pretend she's admiring moss. Eleanor turns to face you fully. You study her eyes, their depth, their clarity, the way they seem to weigh you without judgment. "I've been thinking," she says quietly, "about the way this ends." You blink. "Ends?" "Well," she clarifies, "not ends, concludes, changes shape, becomes something official." She's talking about the proposal, about the ring you've tucked away in your drawer at home, about the conversation that's looming between her answer and the next steps, the announcement, the formal letters, the endless guest lists. "I've never done anything like this before," she says, a wry smile tugging at her mouth. "Nor have I," you reply. "I'm winging it." "I can tell," she says, and then so softly you nearly miss it, adds, "But you're very charming when you're uncertain." Your heart stutters. She steps closer. You don't touch her. Not yet, but your hand hovers near her waist, the air between you electric with risk. "I want to kiss you," you whisper. She meets your eyes. "I know." You wait. You don't move until she does. She leans in just enough for her bonnet's ribbon to brush your lapel. You tilt forward, and then you both hear it. The sharp cough of a chaperone who has reached the end of her grace and the edge of her patience. You break apart like startled deer. Eleanor doesn't even pretend to blush. "Shall we return to the house, Carol?" she asks, perfectly composed. "Yes," you say, sounding approximately 2 decades younger than you are. The walk back is wordless. The cousin follows much closer now, as if proximity can smother impropriety already attempted. You're fairly certain she's memorizing your footsteps for use in a future deposition. Fact of the day, kissing before engagement was strictly forbidden among the upper classes. Even the suggestion of romantic contact, especially unchaperoned, could trigger scandal, and a kiss discovered by the wrong eyes could fast-track a reluctant couple into a forced engagement, or worse, total social disgrace. Quirk of the day, some suitors got around the no-contact rules by inventing accidental moments, hand-brushing while passing through a narrow doorway, falling slightly closer on a garden bench than strictly necessary. There were even accounts of young men offering to retrieve a fallen glove, only to take an extra second lingering near a lady's hand. Debate of the day. Was the taboo against kissing an effective moral boundary, or simply a performance of chastity to maintain public image? Many historians believe physical affection was more common than reported, just better hidden. Others argue that genuine restraint created stronger emotional bonds, or stronger frustration. You return to the house in silence. Eleanor walks with perfect poise. You wonder if she feels what you feel, your pulse pounding like a carriage wheel, your skin still tingling from proximity. You didn't kiss her, but you almost did, and in some ways that feels more intense than if you had. At the front steps, she turns to you. "Thank you for the walk," she says. You bow slightly. "Any time." She hesitates, then steps closer again. This time the cousin is far behind, tangled in conversation with the footman about decorative hedges. Eleanor leans forward and whispers, "When the time is right, I'll kiss you, but it won't be in borrowed time." You try not to let your knees buckle. She disappears into the house. You walk back to your horse with the gait of a man who's been struck by a gentle, invisible thunderstorm, and for the first time you're not wondering if she'll say yes, you're wondering when. There is a particular kind of madness that grips a man when he realizes he's no longer pretending. No more testing the waters, no more exchanging poetry under the guise of literary interest. No more strategic strolls arranged by nervous cousins, with one eye on the clock and one hand on the moral failsafe. You are no longer courting, you are preparing. You're arranging yourself physically, emotionally, financially for the leap from possibility to permanence. You're becoming a man who will propose marriage, and it's terrifying. Not because you doubt her. No, never her. Eleanor is impossibly everything, sharp and warm, reserved and brave, with a sense of self so rooted it makes everyone else seem slightly translucent by comparison. You don't worry about loving her. You worry about deserving her. You worry about the sudden suffocating weight of it all. The guests, the arrangements, the inevitable day when the entire world will line up outside your future together and try to measure its worth. And so, as any sensible man would, you panic. Not openly, of course. Outwardly you're calm and civil, attending to your obligations with practiced ease, but inwardly you're spiralling. Which is how you find yourself in the corner of Lady Densley's parlour, pretending to study a painting of a shipwreck while avoiding the woman currently seated next to your mother. That woman is Mrs. Rutledge. And Mrs. Rutledge is what happens when matchmaking becomes a contact sport. She's smiling at you, not sweetly, strategically, and seated beside her is her daughter, Miss Clara Rutledge, a perfectly pleasant young woman with soft ringlets, downcast eyes, and the conversational skills of a sea sponge. You danced with her once. It was like waltzing with a particularly polite shadow. You try to duck away without being noticed, but your mother catches you with the speed of someone who once caught a falling teacup in midair and never stopped talking about it. "Darling," she says, "come say hello to the Rutledges." You obey, reluctantly. Mrs. Rutledge greets you as though she's already ordered your wedding invitation stationery. Clara smiles like she's been trained to. You're offered tea. You accept, then immediately burn your tongue and regret everything. "We've heard rumours," Mrs. Rutledge says, "about a certain young lady occupying much of your time." Your mother sips her tea with the face of a woman who wants to drown in it. You smile blandly. "There are always rumours." Mrs. Rutledge leans forward. "Of course, but one must be careful. Some women know how to appear suitable, until they aren't." You stare at her, and wonder how exactly you're supposed to politely tell someone they've just stepped on your entire heart. Clara continues to smile, unaware or uncaring. You excuse yourself as soon as manners allow and find Geoffrey, who's been loitering by the card table, scowling at a lemon tart like it owes him money. "They're circling," you say. He nods. "They smell blood. Or proposals. Same difference." "They think I'm hesitant." "Are you?" "No," you reply. "Just cautious." Geoffrey shrugs. "That's reasonable. As long as you don't hesitate so long that someone else makes the decision for you." You glance toward the door. Eleanor hasn't arrived. She was meant to be here, briefly at least. You start to worry. Then remind yourself that she always arrives precisely when she means to, and 20 minutes later, she does. She enters with the same quiet gravity as always. No fanfare, no announcement, just presence. People notice, though they pretend not to. The room shifts slightly, as if adjusting to her. You watch her from across the room, heart thudding against your ribs like a bird trying to escape its cage. When she finally reaches you, it's with a small knowing smile. You look like you're about to jump into a river. "I feel like I already have." She glances around. "And are you swimming or sinking?" You pause. "Somewhere in between?" She nods. "Good. That's the honest place to be." You don't kiss her. Of course not. But she touches your sleeve lightly just once, and it's enough to remind you this is real. This is happening. And you don't have to do it alone. Fact of the day. Public proposals were virtually non-existent in Regency England. Engagements were private matters, confirmed between families before any public announcement was made. A man might ask a woman directly, but only if the groundwork had already been laid, and even then, it was often followed immediately by formal correspondence to both sets of parents. Quirk of the day, gentlemen often pretended to consult with their female acquaintances about ring design or wedding customs as a way to gather preferences without tipping their hand. In truth, everyone knew, but pretending not to know was half the game. Debate of the day. Historians still debate whether Regency proposals were as emotionally distant as they seemed. Some suggest they were all arrangement and no affection. Others argue that beneath the stoicism, deep feeling was quietly at play, just hidden beneath layers of etiquette and fear. That evening you write a letter. Not to Eleanor, to her father, a formal request for permission to propose. You use your best handwriting. You're brief but clear. You sign it with your full name. The next morning you send it by trusted courier, your heart stuffed into the envelope alongside the ink. And then you wait. Again. 3 days. Nothing. Then a knock at the door. A footman, a reply. You open it slowly, as if it might explode. It contains only 3 words. We await you. You set it down. Hard. You are no longer imagining the proposal. You are preparing it. The morning you're to propose feels like stepping onto a ship that may or may not have a flaw. You've shaved twice, ruined 2 cravats, and changed your waistcoat 3 times, each one increasingly too much. Geoffrey, unhelpfully lounging in your study's chair with a biscuit and absolutely zero concern, offers the sage advice of just breathe and try not to faint. If you fall over, they'll assume you have weak ankles and then it's all over. You tell him to leave. He eats another biscuit. Eventually you settle on a dark green coat. Solid, respectable, not too cheerful, not too grim. You look like a man who owns a modest estate and a moderately interesting library. You look like someone who might say, "May I have your daughter's hand in marriage?" without bursting into flames. The Marchmonts are expecting you at noon. You arrive at 11:57 because anything else would be either desperate or rude. The butler, who now knows your name and seems vaguely disappointed by that fact, shows you into the drawing room. It's the same room where you first took tea with Eleanor and her mother. The same stiff chairs, the same floral arrangement that's been aggressively refreshed every week since 1804. Her father is already waiting, a newspaper folded crisply in his lap. Her mother is by the fireplace, knitting something that looks like it might be judging you. "Mr. Barrington," Lord Marchmont says. You bow. "Lord Marchmont, Lady Marchmont, thank you for receiving me." There's a pause, then he gestures to the chair across from him. You sit. The silence that follows is thick and ceremonial, and then he says it. "You have come to propose to my daughter. It is not a question. It is a ritual." "I have," you reply, careful, steady. He nods. Lady Marchmont glances up briefly, then back down to her knitting, her needles clicking with the same rhythm as a countdown clock. "Her answer," Lord Marchmont says, "will be her own." You nod. "As it should be." He watches you for another moment, then leans back, as if the weight of your intentions is now transferred entirely to her. "She's waiting in the conservatory," Lady Marchmont says without looking up. "She asked to receive you alone." You stand, bow again, try not to trip over the rug. The conservatory is bathed in light and filled with the smell of citrus trees and something faintly floral. Eleanor stands near the window, back to you, fingers resting on the edge of a potted orange tree as if she's drawing courage from fruit. When she turns, her expression is unreadable. Calm, collected, perhaps even a little amused. "Mr. Barrington," she says, "you're early." 3 minutes, you reply. "I've never been so punctual in my life." She smiles. That helps, a little. You stand in silence for a moment. It stretches, but not unkindly. Just long enough for you to remember that you're supposed to be doing something. You clear your throat. "I wrote to your father." "I know, and he gave his consent. I expected he would." You pause. That leaves only one question. She tilts her head, as if inviting it. You step forward, very slightly, just enough to show her you mean it. "Miss Marchmont," you say, "would you do me the honour of becoming my wife?" There. Done. Said. And then, silence, not cold, not cruel, just measured. She takes a breath and then says, "You haven't kissed me yet." Your stomach drops. No, I haven't. Not even when I gave you the perfect opportunity in the garden." You glance down, abashed. "I didn't want to overstep." She takes a step closer. "And if I say yes, would you still hesitate?" "Not for a second." Her eyes search your face. "Then stop hesitating." Facts of the day. Engagements during the Regency period were serious contracts. Once agreed upon, they were considered legally and socially binding. Breaking one could result in ruined reputations, lawsuits, and lifelong humiliation. Proposal wasn't just romantic, it was a public declaration of intent with real consequences. Quirk of the day. It wasn't uncommon for a couple to take a long walk, sometimes several hours, after an accepted proposal. The idea was to give them privacy to speak freely about the future. now that it was officially theirs to discuss. These post-proposal walks were often the first moments a couple shared without the boundaries of formal courtship. Debate of the day. Some argue that Regency-era proposals lacked passion, being so tightly wound in etiquette and economic negotiation. But letters and diaries suggest otherwise, that many proposals were deeply emotional, intense moments of clarity between two people who had spent months or years manoeuvring toward the freedom to simply ask and answer. You step closer, and this time you kiss her. It's not dramatic. There's no sweeping music or falling petals, just your lips, gently meeting hers in the filtered light of the conservatory. Her hand comes up to rest lightly on your chest. Yours hovers at her waist. It's delicate, tender, a first kiss that feels both like a beginning and a confirmation. When you part, she smiles and says, "Yes, that's it. No speech, no dramatics, just yes," and your world tilts a little in its orbit. You return to the drawing room hand in hand. Lady Marchmont looks up, sees the way Eleanor's fingers are curled around yours, and smiles. Faint, but real. Lord Marchmont exhales like a man who's been holding his breath for a week. "It's done then?" he asks. Eleanor nods. "It's done." He pours a brandy for himself, another for you. Toasts silently, drinks. There will be announcements to send, dresses to be discussed, churches to be considered, but for now the moment is yours. And it is perfect. The announcement appears in the Bath Chronicle 2 days later, nestled between a column about a runaway goose with suspicious behaviour and a list of charitable subscribers to the new hospital wing. There it is in black and white. A match has been arranged between Miss Eleanor Marchmont, only daughter of Lord and Lady Marchmont of Brookley, and Mr. William Barrington of Highfield. No adjectives, no florid descriptions, just arranged, like flowers or furniture. And just like that, everything changes. People stop you in the street now, some offer their congratulations, most smile with the kind of pleasant tightness that suggests they're still calculating whether this outcome benefits or threatens their internal social ladders. You receive a formal card from the Rutledges wishing you domestic bliss, which from Mrs. Rutledge reads more like a curse than a blessing. Geoffrey, of course, throws his arms around you and tells the footman you're both off to get obscenely drunk for romantic reasons. But you don't. You don't even drink the good brandy. You just sit in your study rereading the announcement as if it might blink or vanish. And then you fold it carefully and place it in your desk drawer next to the Byron book she once gave you. Still bookmarked, still worn at the corners. The day after the announcement, Eleanor calls on you. It's not common practice. Brides-to-be don't usually drop by their future husband's home. But she arrives with her mother and the thinnest veil of formality. She's wearing lilac. She doesn't ask to see your library this time. She walks straight past the drawing room and out into the garden, like she's lived there all her life. You follow. "So," she says as the footman retreats and her mother busies herself speaking with your housekeeper, "we are officially arranged." We are. Does it feel strange? You consider this stranger than I thought it would, but not in a bad way. She walks along the edge of the garden path, towing the fallen petals of a tree that bloomed too early and gave up too fast. "I'm going to be your wife," she says, as if testing the sentence. You want to say you already feel like mine, but that would sound possessive, and she's not that sort of woman. Nor would you want her to be. Instead, you say, "And I'll be your husband." She looks up, smiles. That part I'm still adjusting to. You mock offend, placing a hand over your chest. She laughs. "You'll do, I suppose," then more serious. "But there are things I'd like us to be honest about, before everything begins." You nod. "Ask me anything." She steps closer, suddenly not teasing at all. "Do you expect obedience?" The word lands sharp between you. "No," you say without hesitation. "I expect partnership. Discussion, not obedience." "And do you believe in separate accounts?" You blink. "You mean financial?" She nods. "Yes, I'd like a portion to remain mine, not because I don't trust you, but because I've seen what happens to women who lose all sense of financial agency." You don't hesitate. "I think it's wise." She studies your face as if waiting for the catch. "There isn't one," you say. "You're not property." Her expression softens, but there's steel behind it. "And what about children?" This one gives you pause. It's not that you haven't thought of it, it's just that you didn't expect it now, not while the engagement ink is still drying. I'd like them, you say honestly, but not at the expense of your health or your happiness. She exhales, visibly relieved. Good, because I'd like them too, but I'd also like to write, publish, maybe, under a name that isn't yours. You want to be Eleanor Marchmont in print? I want to be Eleanor Marchmont where it matters. Then that's what you'll be. She reaches out and takes your hand, not with passion, but with purpose. You're not afraid of me, she says quietly. I never was. You should be a little. You smile. A little. Fact of the day, Regency engagements were not just social contracts. They were binding agreements that could have legal consequences if broken. A man who jilted a woman could be sued for breach of promise, and the scandal would stain his reputation for years. A woman who broke off an engagement risked far more. Her prospects, her standing, even her friendships. Quirk of the day, some engaged couples exchanged lovers' eyes, miniature painted portraits of one another's eyes set in lockets or brooches. It allowed for a piece of one's beloved to be worn close to the heart without being too overt. It was sentimental and ever so slightly creepy. Debate of the day. Historians often debate the level of agency women had in engagements like Eleanor's. While technically free to say no, the weight of family expectation and societal momentum often made it nearly impossible. That Eleanor chose, clearly, emotionally and with terms, is significant. She is not entering marriage as a fate, but as a choice. Later, after Eleanor and her mother have gone, you find yourself sitting on that same garden bench, fingers brushing the imprint her hand left in yours. You're not imagining it anymore. It's happening. The dress fittings, the invitations, the negotiation of ceremony versus celebration, the endless visits from well-meaning relatives who want to make sure the flowers convey the right message. Your mother insists on roses. Eleanor mentions wildflowers. Geoffrey suggests something that blooms only once a decade and smells like smoke. You suggest lavender, and that apparently is the correct answer. The days pass in a slow flurry of preparations. One night, Geoffrey finds you seated at your writing desk, blank paper in front of you. You composing a poem? You shake your head. A vow? He raises an eyebrow. Getting ahead of yourself? No, you say, just trying to get it right. Because she'll remember, because she notices every word, and because this isn't just a moment. It's the rest of your life. The morning of the wedding arrives with the silence of snow, not literal snow, of course. It's April, and the skies are stubbornly blue, but the kind of hush that settles over the world just before something irreversible. Your house is full of movement, all of it pointed at you. Your valet hovers like an anxious ghost. Your mother keeps appearing in doorways as if trying to remember whether she forgot something important or is simply feeling nostalgic. Even Geoffrey, usually so glib and steady, is unnaturally quiet as he helps you fasten the final cuff button. You're pale, he says at last. You glance at him in the mirror. Am I? Like a man who's about to commit to a lifetime of matching upholstery and shared bathwater. You adjust your cravat, which has chosen today to resist all known logic and geometry. Thank you for the poetry, he shrugs. You'll be fine. You've always known it was her. You don't reply. You don't need to. You ride to the church alone. That was your choice. It gives you a chance to feel the air, to clear your head, to remember that despite the orchestration, this is just two people choosing each other. Or at least, that's what you try to tell yourself as you sit in the pew room behind the altar, listening to guests filter in with the rustling energy of a gathering storm. It's a modest ceremony by society standards. No carriages piled with gold, no foreign nobility flown in from distant estates, no elaborate choirs imported from London. Eleanor insisted on simple, elegant, honest. The pews are decorated with lavender, your suggestion, and ivy, her mother's compromise. A string quartet is warming up in the alcove, playing something light and forgettable, which is the point. The vicar finds you and offers a quick nod. You don't recognise him. Eleanor chose him because he had kind eyes and a voice that doesn't sound like a funeral bell. That's the level of precision she's applied to this day, and you're grateful. When the doors open, you take your place at the altar, and then you wait. The music shifts. Everyone turns, and then there she is, Eleanor Marchmont, soon to be Eleanor Barrington, walking slowly up the aisle in a gown the colour of cream and candlelight. There are no jewels, no feathers, no dramatic veils. Just her. Hair pinned with sprigs of lavender, shoulders squared, chin lifted, eyes focused only on you. You feel the room fall away, your hands go numb, your knees make one final valiant plea to flee the scene. But then she reaches you, and she smiles, and you breathe again. You take her hand. It's warm. It's real. The ceremony begins. The vicar speaks gently, efficiently, as if he's performed this exact scene in a dream. Your names are spoken aloud, not as titles, but as promises. Eleanor does not falter. She doesn't glance around. She watches you. Every word shaped like something she's been building for years. When it's your turn to speak, you remember the vow you wrote. The one you rewrote 6 times. The one you practiced until your voice cracked. You speak it now, and it's not perfect. You forget a word, your throat catches, you hesitate. But she squeezes your hand, and that's enough. The rings are simple, gold, unadorned, chosen because she said, "I'd like us to wear the same thing, equal, always." When the vicar pronounces you husband and wife, the church seems to pause, not with awe, but with relief, as if everyone expected this to happen all along, and the universe has finally caught up. You kiss her. It is not scandalous, it is not hesitant. It is the kind of kiss that would have caused a minor panic 6 months ago, but now earns a round of genteel applause and a few sighs from the front row, and then it's over. Except, of course, it isn't. The rest of the day blurs. Guests crowd around with congratulations and gentle judgment. Plates are passed, champagne is sipped. There is cake, though you hardly taste it. There are speeches, one from Geoffrey that begins with, "I once saw William fall off a horse into a river," and somehow ends with a sincere toast that has you blinking hard into your wine glass. Eleanor disappears at one point, dragged off by cousins and aunts who want to touch her sleeves and ask unhelpful questions about offspring. You find her later leaning against the back gate of the garden, watching the sun slide down the hills like a secret. "I escaped," she says without turning. "So did I," you reply, joining her. For a moment, you both just breathe. Then she asks, "Are you ready?" You pause. For what? For all of it. Not just marriage, but the mess, the interruptions, the way we'll have to choose each other over and over, even when it's inconvenient. You glance at her, smiling. Especially then, she turns to face you, and you realise this is the real beginning. Fact of the day, Regency weddings were often held earlier in the day, followed by a breakfast rather than a dinner. The ceremony itself was brief, with many couples married in small parish churches rather than grand cathedrals. Simplicity was often a sign of intimacy, not lack of wealth. Quirk of the day, it was customary to save a piece of wedding cake and tuck it under one's pillow, particularly for unmarried guests. Supposedly it would bring dreams of one's future spouse. Of course, the reality was crumbs, ants, and a very soggy morning. Debate of the day. Some believe the marriage ceremony in Regency society was largely performative, a necessary box to tick before the true relationship could begin. Others argue that the formality created a clarity and intention often missing from modern relationships. Whatever the truth, what happened after mattered far more than the walk down the aisle. Later, when the carriages have gone and the guests have faded into stories and tired yawns, you and Eleanor return to the house, your house, together. She takes your hand, and for the first time, she walks through the front door as your wife. Married life begins not with trumpets or fireworks, or even a dramatic shedding of silk layers, but with the soft creak of floorboards and the rustle of a new gown being unfastened by unfamiliar hands. Your hands, to be precise, trembling, cautious, reverent hands that now belong, legally and otherwise, to her. Your wedding night, that long-feared, much-speculated threshold of adulthood, arrives with surprisingly little fanfare. The two of you stand in the bedchamber like strangers who've signed a contract they haven't yet read, and for a moment you both simply laugh? Not unkindly, just nervously, sweetly, like two conspirators who've realised they've just pulled off the greatest heist of their lives. She removes her gloves. You loosen your cravat. There's nothing rehearsed about it. No sweeping gestures or dramatic disrobing, just the awkward, quiet beauty of two people fumbling toward each other in the unfamiliar shape of forever. And you don't rush it. Instead, you talk. You sit at the edge of the bed, boots kicked off, hair dishevelled, Eleanor leaning back against the headboard, like a woman who has conquered a small country and now wants a biscuit. "You really do snore," she says, recalling the night you fell asleep in the carriage during a long ride through Essex. You pretend to deny it. She raises an eyebrow. You surrender immediately. You ask her if she's afraid. She tells you she was more afraid of the flowers arriving wilted. You ask her what she wants this marriage to feel like in 10 years. She says, "Not like a performance. I don't want to become one of those women who laughs when she's expected to and only speaks to her husband when she's giving orders about supper." "And me?" you ask. "What do I become?" She leans her head on your shoulder. Hopefully still interesting. That night you don't just consummate a marriage. You begin something far more delicate and strange. A life. A shared existence full of small decisions and everyday negotiations. A quiet agreement that you will both keep choosing. Not just today, not just at anniversaries, but constantly. And yes, the physical part happens too. Eventually, slowly, and with laughter. Which you later agree is the only proper way to begin something so vulnerable. There is no dramatic swelling of orchestral strings. There is a lamp, a breeze, and the sound of two people figuring it out as they go. The next morning you wake before she does. The sun's just brushing the tops of the curtains, and for a while you just lie there and watch her sleep. You've never seen her like this, utterly at ease, hair loose, the lines of her face softened by dreams. You wonder what she's dreaming about. Probably logic puzzles, or fencing with her old governess. You slip out of bed quietly, pull on a robe and head downstairs. The house is quiet. Your house. But already it feels different. Warmer, like it's holding its breath. Your mother arrives unannounced before breakfast, which is, unfortunately, exactly the sort of thing she would do. "I just wanted to make sure you're both still alive," she says, breezing past the footman with the air of someone inspecting newly purchased furniture. "Alive and only mildly traumatized," you reply. She sits, glances around. "She'll rearrange the place, you know, bit by bit. I expect she will, and she'll change you too." You smile. "I hope so." She stares at you, then without any warning says, "You chose better than I did." You pause. "Mother?" "Your father was a storm. You've chosen whether you can live in." And then, because she doesn't know how to linger in tenderness, she waves her hand and demands tea. Eleanor comes downstairs an hour later, wrapped in a shawl and yawning like a woman who has absolutely nothing to prove. She nods to your mother with just enough grace to pass inspection and pours herself a cup of tea, as if she's always belonged here. And maybe she always has. Fact of the day. Regency weddings did not include honeymoons in the modern sense. Couples often remained at home following the ceremony, hosting visiting relatives or managing estate affairs. The idea of travelling for romance wasn't common until later in the 19th century. Intimacy was expected to begin immediately, quietly, discreetly, and usually in the very home where one's mother-in-law might also be having breakfast. Quirk of the day, some newlywed couples wrote letters to each other the morning after the wedding to mould it, left on pillows or tucked into books. It was a way to acknowledge the transition from courtship to partnership, especially when spoken words might have failed or felt too vulnerable. Debate of the day. Some scholars argue that Regency marriage was a rigid social cage, but others suggest that within its confines, genuine affection and intimacy could, and often did, flourish. The boundaries were fixed, yes, but so were the expectations, which gave couples a shared framework in which to build emotional connection. Later that day, the two of you take a walk. No chaperones, no time limits, no polite excuses. Just a husband, wife meandering through the field behind the orchard, arms linked, sun warm on your backs, the road ahead open and terrifying and wonderful. At one point, she looks over at you and says, "So, now what?" You think about it, then reply, "Now we begin." The rhythm of married life in Regency England is a strange kind of music, predictable in its beat, repetitive in structure, but full of subtle variations that only the two of you can hear. At first, everything feels ceremonial, like you're play-acting some genteel domestic comedy. There are formal breakfasts with slightly too polite conversation, small hesitations when choosing which side of the bed to claim, and of course the deeply awkward moment when you both realise that the staff has already begun referring to you as Mr. Msov and Mrs. Barrington, like you've become a brand of soap. But the awkwardness fades. It always does. Slowly, your home becomes hers too. The library shelf once reserved for dusty histories now contains 3 volumes of botanical illustrations and an old French grammar book she keeps promising to study. A bonnet appears on the hallway hook. A strand of her hair turns up in your shaving brush. There is a dent on the settee from the exact spot where she prefers to read in the late afternoon. You start to notice her patterns, how she hums, tunelessly but endearingly, when she reads letters aloud, how she tucks her foot beneath her when she's cross, how she never takes the last biscuit, but watches until you do, then sighs and declares you hopeless. She in turn discovers your less flattering habits, how you speak to the dog like it's a tenant farmer, how you leave your cravat discarded on whatever surface is nearest the door, how you sometimes laugh at your own thoughts before realizing you've said nothing aloud. None of it breaks the spell. If anything, it weaves it tighter. Your first major test as a married couple arrives one wet Tuesday in May, when Eleanor insists on joining you for the tenant rounds. You warn her, the weather is grim, the roads are worse, and some of the families can be blunt, but she insists. And so you set out side by side in a rattling carriage, bound for a part of the estate you've never seen her visit before. It's muddy, it's slow, it's full of cows in the road and boots that weren't meant for actual mud. But Eleanor is determined. She listens as the families talk about crop failures and aching backs, nods attentively at old Mr. Garvey's complaints about the roof you already fixed last year, and gently scolds a tenant's son for skipping school. She doesn't try to impress anyone, she simply shows up, with her mind sharp and her presence steady. On the way back, soaked and shivering, she says, "I like knowing what you're responsible for." You glance at her. "And do you like being responsible for it too?" She smiles. "I said I'd marry you. I didn't say I'd do nothing useful." And that's that. Fact of the day. A wife's role in estate life varied greatly depending on class and personality. Some were silent ornaments. Others, like Eleanor, became involved in tenant welfare, estate finances, or managing household staff. While not legally in charge, they often wielded quiet but significant power. Quirk of the day. Many upper-class couples in the Regency period kept separate bedrooms, not because of scandal or frostiness, but for comfort and privacy. Visiting one another's rooms was treated with the same blend of discretion and anticipation one might apply to an illicit rendezvous, only with slightly better slippers. Debate of the day. Did marriage actually offer women more freedom in Regency England? On paper, wives lost legal autonomy. Yet in practice, many women found more intellectual and social freedom as wives than they'd had as daughters. Being mistress of a household, particularly one with supportive partnership, could be its own kind of quiet revolution. You begin to notice how the house functions differently now. Meals feel less performative, though. The drawing room isn't just for guests, it's for reading together, dozing in armchairs, and the occasional mildly competitive game of chess, which she always wins. The staff, once stiff, begin to soften around her. Even the cook, who answers to no mortal being, starts slipping Eleanor extra apple tarts after supper. Some nights you stay up too late just talking. About everything, about nothing. She asks you what you believed marriage would feel like, and you admit you had no idea. You ask her if she misses anything, and she confesses, "Sometimes I miss being only myself, but not enough to go back." You take small trips, to nearby estates, to visit family. To Bath once, where Eleanor is mistaken for a widow because of her preference for darker clothing, and spends the day delighting in the misunderstanding, before finally introducing herself with your surname and watching the surprise ripple through a tea room like a dropped spoon. Not everything is seamless. There's the time she tries to fix a leaky pipe herself and nearly floods the linen room. The week you accidentally double book a visit from your mother and Geoffrey, resulting in a full-blown standoff over parlour etiquette and marmalade. And there are quiet disagreements, the kind you don't expect but can't avoid. You argue once about whether or not to hire a second carriage. Another time about how involved she should be in estate account ledgers. She wins both, though the second is a draw in spirit. Still, each quarrel ends the same way, not with a slammed door, but with a deeper understanding of where each of you ends and begins. You're not the same person, and that's the point. One night, as the summer begins to burn off the last of spring, you find yourselves sitting outside watching the stars. It's late. There's a blanket shared between you and a nearly empty bottle of wine between your feet. She leans her head on your shoulder. "I never thought I'd be happy," she says quietly. "Why not?" Because I thought it was something you waited for, something handed to you. You brush a lock of hair from her face. And now? She pickles, eyes still on the stars. Now I think it's something you build. One brick at a time. You don't say anything, you just sit there in the soft dark knowing she's right. Summer settles across the countryside like a lazy cat, warm and golden and indifferent to your schedule. The days stretch longer, your sleeves roll shorter, and the linen sheets get kicked off the bed more often than not. The house feels half asleep, caught in a drowsy rhythm of open windows, sticky ink pens, and servants too polite to complain about the heat. You and Eleanor fall into a kind of quiet contentment, the kind only possible when no one is looking and nothing needs proving. It's the season of afters. After the wedding, after the first wave of visits, after the endless parade of polite congratulations delivered through tightly laced corsets and thinly veiled curiosity. Everyone has moved on, the whispers have faded. The world has accepted that you are married, and you are so far remarkably happy. This, of course, is when life decides to shift again. It happens quietly, as these things always do. A few missed breakfasts. A moment in the garden where Eleanor pauses and holds her hand against her belly. A sudden dislike of the lavender-scented soap she's loved for years. None of it registers as significant at first. You write it off to the heat. She blames a stubborn pie, but there's a new stillness in her movements, a kind of hush that isn't exhaustion, but expectancy. And then one morning she hands you a letter. It isn't sealed. It isn't even addressed. Just folded parchment, already open. You read the first line and sit down without meaning to. I believe I may be expecting. You read it again, and then a third time. When you look up, she's standing in the doorway, arms folded, expression unreadable. "Well," she says. You blink. "Well, I think I forgot how to breathe." She walks over and sits beside you. "You're not fainting," she observes. "So that's promising." You turn to her slowly. "Is it real, or are you sure?" She nods. "Not officially, but the signs are convincing." You sit in silence for a long moment. Then you say softly, "I don't think I've ever loved you quite as much as I do in this moment." She rolls her eyes. "That's a wildly hormonal thing to say." "Entirely possible." You both laugh, though her hand hasn't left her stomach. Not since she entered the room. You place yours over it, gentle and hesitant. There's nothing to feel, not yet, but the gesture matters. It means you believe her. It means you're with her. Fact of the day: pregnancy and regency. England was cloaked in euphemism. Women were described as being in a delicate condition or expecting a confinement. Open discussion was considered vulgar. There were no baby showers or maternity portraits, just a gradual retreat from public life as the due date approached. Quirk of the day: some women sent subtle signals to announce their pregnancies, changing their clothing style, avoiding certain dances, or using coded phrases in letters. One common euphemism was to mention that they had taken to keeping to home, which signalled withdrawal from the social calendar without admitting the reason outright. Debate of the day: scholars still argue over the degree of agency women had over their pregnancies during this era. With limited medical care and no real understanding of prenatal science, childbirth was both sacred and terrifying. Some women embraced it as their true social function, others feared it as a sentence with no guarantee of survival. You don't tell anyone at first. You let the news live quietly between the two of you, like a secret poem written in a shared language. There's no rush to announce, no craving for applause, just slow mornings, soft glances, and the occasional moment where you catch her standing still, one hand resting over her middle, as if already learning how to protect. She begins to glow, though she'll deny it with every breath. Her appetite changes. She weeps at a poem she's read a dozen times and then demands lemon slices in water for the rest of the day. The cook adjusts without comment. The staff begins to tread more softly. The entire house somehow leans toward her, drawn in by the quiet gravity of creation. You, meanwhile, begin preparing like a man going to war. You reorganize the nursery, which has been a storage room since before you inherited the estate. You write to your sister in London for advice. You track down Eleanor's childhood nursemaid and offer her a position before you've even asked your wife if she wants one. She doesn't scold you, she just laughs and kisses your temple and says, "You know you don't have to solve everything before the first kick, yes? But you do, or at least you want to try." Because this new life isn't just about swaddling blankets and tiny bonnets. It's about a new version of both of you. A family, a continuation. It changes how you walk through the world. It changes how you look at your wife. One night, near the end of summer, you're sitting in the same garden where you once kissed her for the first time. The sky is streaked with fading gold. She's curled beside you, wrapped in a shawl, her silhouette different or rounder, fuller, unmistakably maternal. You say, "I don't know if I'll be a good father." She turns to you. "You won't be perfect." Comforting, but you'll be present. You'll try. That's better than perfection. You rest your hand against her belly, where the faintest flutter has begun to show. "I hope it's a girl," she says suddenly. "Why?" "Because then I can teach her how to never apologize for being clever." "And if it's a boy?" She smiles. "Then I'll teach him how to recognize when a clever woman is trying to help him." You watch the stars appear one by one, quiet and unwavering. You're not just married now, you're becoming something else. A father, a witness, a protector of not just your wife, but the shape of what you're building together. It's terrifying and somehow completely right.